Hello and welcome to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we're talking the 1976 Best Actress race at the Academy Awards, where Faye Dunaway won for her performance in Network. But why did she beat fellow nominees Marie-Christine Barrault, Talia Shire, Sissy Spacek, and Liv Ullmann? We'll explore all this and more today on And the Runner-Up Is. Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, here to talk about the 49th year of Best Actress at the Oscars, which covered the films of 1976. We'll be discussing how Faye Dunaway won, why the losers lost, and who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. And my guest today, one of my great friends and co-workers from our old Gold Derby days. We both since moved on, and he's shooting films. He's a writer and podcaster at AwardsWatch. You last heard him on this show, actually on the Best Actress series here, where we talked about the 1944 Best Actress lineup, including Ingrid Bergman's first win, and, Barbara Stanwyck in Double Indemnity. We also found a way to differentiate Mr. Skeffington and Mrs. Parkington, so love that for us. Welcome back to the show, Zach Laws.
Hello, it's great to be back here after 32 years of Oscar history.
Yes, it's true. 34 years of Oscar history, about 1.5 years in podcast time.
Right.
So as you can tell, I'm really speeding through them at this point.
You sure are. Yeah, I mean, it's crazy that you're about to be done with what is the greatest decade of American cinema as far as
Yes.
many of us are concerned.
Yeah, it's been a real joy. I'm trying to savor this era as much as possible because some of the lineups to come perhaps don't quite live up to the number of great lineups that we have in this decade. So
I've been really
yes.
enjoying listening to you talk about it in your previous episodes. Of course, yeah. I'm envious of some of the years that my friends have been able to talk about during this great period of cinema. But I'm really excited to talk about this one because it's got one of my all-time favorite Best Actress winners in one of my all-time favorite films. So,
well, excellent. Well, I'm glad you're here to speak on Faye. But yes, before we talk 1976, as always, got to get some questions out of the way. So as a returning guest, you have already told me your favorite Best Actress win of all time, which is Frances McDormand in Fargo.
Sure is.
At least that's what you said at the time. I assume that's still true.
Hasn't changed, no.
Good. Okay. Well, my alternate question for you then is, what would you say is your favorite Best Actress lineup of all time?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of good options to choose from. I think from like the time when you and I first started getting into the Oscars, which would have been like the early 2000s, it's hard to argue with years like 2002, 2006, 2010. I mean, those are just like,
yes,
pound for pound, like find the weak link in there. I wanted to choose one from the 1970s because it is the greatest decade for American film. And I was listening to your episode with my fellow AwardsWatch contributor, Sophia Simonello, about the year 1974. And I have to concur with what you two said of that just being an all-time year. Not just in terms of the performances that were nominated, but the sheer quality of the movies that they're nominated for.
Yep.
And the fact that they are so clearly, that they're given such great roles to play in those films. It's not just like the perfunctory housewife or the perfunctory girlfriend. Yeah,
yes.
And that year also, I think, represents the apex of 70s cinema, and that the rise of the blockbuster is just around the corner, and studios are going to start becoming more risk adverse as the decade goes on. But it's a beautiful period in cinema when you could have like a person like Jenna Rollins get nominated for A Woman Under the Influence and compete against Faye Dunaway in Chinatown and Ellen Burstyn and Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore. I mean, those are movies I watch all the time. You guys talked about that year really beautifully. I'm sure that your listeners
Thank
have
you.
already listened to it, and so I won't drone on too much about it. I'll give like my runner-up for the best lineup of the
Sure.
1970s.
Okay.
1978, which was
Mm-hmm.
Jane
Right around the
Fonda won
corner.
her, yeah, coming up. Jane Fonda won her second Oscar for Coming Home. You had Joe Clayburgh nominated for An Unmarried Woman, amazing performance.
Incredible.
Uh, Ingrid Bergman nominated for Autumn Sonata, a woman who I love and whose Oscar wins don't necessarily represent her best work. At least two of them don't,
Yeah.
but certainly her
The
nomination
one
for
we
Autumn
talked
Sonata.
about did.
Yes,
I
absolutely. I
think.
mean, and this would have been a worthy fourth win. Um,
Yeah.
Geraldine Page in Interiors, her best performance.
Hmm.
Really, really great film. And then your five is Ellen Burstyn, same time next year. Which, when your five is Ellen Burstyn, that's a pretty good lineup.
Yeah. Can't go wrong there.
Yeah,
Yes. Well, here we are basically in the middle of those 2 years.
yeah.
But yeah, excellent. Well, my other question for you, you told me that Gloria Swanson in Sunset Boulevard was your most heartbreaking loss in this
Mhm.
category. So here I will ask, what would you say is your most heartbreaking snub in Best Actress? Someone who didn't even get the nomination.
Well, much like you, I will forever be perturbed that Naomi Watts was not nominated for Mulholland Drive.
Thank you.
Um, that looks especially bad nowadays because of how that film has grown in stature. One that in my years of actually like following the Oscars and doing predictions, that really did break my heart when it didn't happen. And by the time the nominations came out, I pretty much knew that she wasn't going to get nominated, but it still hurt. Was Annette Bening in 20th Century Women.
Hmm.
I saw that movie that came out about a year after my own mother passed away. And there were so many things about that film that so perfectly captured the nuances of, being a son raised by a single mother. And it wasn't like a one-to-one parallel, but Annette Bening reminded me of my own mother in so many different ways that were just profoundly powerful. And when I saw that movie for the first time, I thought, well, this could be it for her. And it would have been a really wonderful way to honor her career for what I think is her best performance.
Yeah, I actually agree with you on that. But yeah, at the same time, like you said, your personal connection to it, and in a certain respect, sometimes that kind of thing transcends whether or not they get an Oscar nomination for it, you know,
Yeah. I mean, it's
because this will endure more than Meryl Streep singing poorly in Florence
absolutely.
Foster Jenkins. So
And I think that Meryl Streep probably would have voted for Annette Bening over herself that year. If I,
perhaps, yes. If there's any indication from her cringing reaction watching her own clip on the night, then
yes,
yes.
you got to give it to Meryl. Like, she is, above all else, an honest Oscar watcher and judge of
Yes,
her own performances.
exactly. Ugh, yes. Well, thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
I definitely agree on that. I think Annette Bening just deserves more in general. You know, she is definitely one of those people like Glenn Close, like Sigourney Weaver, who are just in this class of Michelle Pfeiffer too, who I just kind of want to have that moment. You know,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, and it's a shame because like so many of the times when they give like the Oscar baity performances, right?
yeah.
It's not up to the standard of their best work, and their best work is so often just kind of ignored, which is
Hmm.
the case for so many of those actions that you talked about.
Exactly. But I think it's time now to
Let's do it.
go all the way back to 1976 and discuss this Best Actress lineup, the 49th Academy Awards. The nominees were Marie-Christine Barrault in Cousine, Faye Dunaway in Network, Talia Shire in Rocky, Sissy Spacek in Carrie, and Liv Ullmann in Face to Face, with the winner being Faye Dunaway. So before we break down these performances, Zach, tell me your overall thoughts on this lineup.
Well, I think it's it's a pretty good lineup overall. I mean, when you're talking about Network, Rocky, Carrie, those are three all-time classics from the period. And they all feature strong roles for their female leads. I had never seen Face to Face or Cousine before I was tasked with breaking down this year. And I think it's an interesting indication of where the Academy was at during this period, that both I'm blanking on her on the name of the Cousine star. Excuse me.
Marie-Christine Barrault.
Thank you.
Yes.
People with three names just always trip me up. But the reason why she and Liv Ullmann got nominated, the Academy was in this period of recognizing international cinema. You see those films as well as Seven Beauties getting major nominations across the categories outside of just the foreign language film category. And it really speaks to the influence of international cinema on the Academy at this period. So yeah, I think that's what's really interesting about this lineup. And you're going to start to see that fall away quite dramatically in the 80s and even into the 90s to an extent. We've seen it come back quite a bit because of the influx of international Academy members. It still hasn't come back to quite the same level as what we saw during the 1970s. And yeah, I mean, you also like obviously see the influence of international cinema on American films at this time, and that like a movie like Network or a movie like Carrie would not have been possible were it not for the new Hollywood of the late 60s and 1970s, people pushing down barriers of what was acceptable in American filmmaking because they were so influenced by what was going on overseas.
Yes, that's a very good point. This is our second lineup where we have multiple non-English language performances in the lineup, first being 1966. So, yes, a nice parallel there. 10 years later, we have another one. Yeah, it's quite a lineup. We do, like you said, have three movies here that have really held up as some of the most well-loved and well-known films of the 70s and of film period, with Network, Rocky, Carrie. And yeah, these two non-English language performances I do think is always exciting just in general when the Academy ventures out of their very narrow viewpoint of what is valuable in acting and cinema. And what I also love is that they are so completely opposite in terms of style. One is extremely subtle and understated. The other is quite literally screaming in your face.
Yeah.
So, we have we also have some category confusion, perhaps, that we can
Yeah.
discuss.
Yeah, I mean, totally. And I also would say that, because I was looking at this year in general and trying to figure out like who would have been the snubs. And
Yeah,
I think there is this thing that like Ellen Burstyn always used to talk about this throughout the decade that, there were so few good roles for women.
yeah,
And to an extent, she was sort of right because, and maybe I guess we'll talk about this a little bit later, but I had a hard time coming up with very many people who I thought might have replaced any of these five actresses, you know?
hmm
So I think that that's also like part of why there was, I mean, for one thing, like foreign cinema was more prevalent in American cinemas at that time. And, people were like going to foreign language films all the time and making them massive hits. But yeah, I mean, it was much easier for them to look outside of their comfort zones and recognize performances like Liv Ullmann's or uh, Marie-Christine Barrault. I'm gonna keep saying it until I
you'll get it by the
memorize
end of
it.
this discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yes. And I'm also just glad that we get at least one last opportunity to talk Faye Dunaway. She came and went rather quickly in terms of this show and her Oscar run, all within 9 years, I believe. So yeah, glad we get to talk about her. Glad we get to talk about Liv Ullmann again one last time here. Plus, of course, we have the rare horror performance. I guess
yeah.
you could kind of argue two horror performances if you think about it.
In a way,
So,
yeah, in a way, yeah.
yes. But yeah, I've been looking forward to breaking down this lineup for a while, and I'm glad you're here to to help me do it. So, shall we get started?
Yeah, I'm excited. Let's go for it.
All right, we're starting off with the lady that Zach will know by the end of this discussion, Marie-Christine Barrault in Cousine. Yes, very intrigued by this nomination and what we'll say about it. Because Marie-Christine Barrault, she's a French actress, obviously. She was not a big film star before Cousine, and she didn't really cross over much with American audiences after this film or before this film, really, although she did have a role in Stardust Memories, the Woody Allen film. But yeah, she mostly stuck to French film, French TV. But leading up to this, she studied at the Conservatoire National d'Art Dramatique, studying for 2 years there. She had done mostly TV. She was also the niece of Jean-Louis Barrault, who was a very well-regarded French star, but she has claimed in interviews that there was not nepotism going on there. Her words, not mine. But
Yeah,
her first credited film role was in My Night at Maud's, which was a French New Wave film from 1969, which was
great
nominated
movie.
for foreign language film. Also, a screenplay was nominated. But again, there wasn't too much international crossover after that until Cousine, which actually found a lot of success internationally despite being a pretty small film without really any big stars. And even though it does get an Oscar nomination for foreign language film and screenplay, the nomination for Marie-Christine Barrault really kind of came out of nowhere. She wasn't nominated literally anywhere else. Her Oscar nomination is literally her only citation for this film, which is pretty remarkable, especially for a non-English language performance and film. So Cousine, as you can probably guess, is about a pair of cousins, Martha, played by Marie-Christine, and Ludovic, played by Victor Lenoir, who are related by marriage but not by blood, and they meet at a wedding where they come to realize that their spouses are actually having an affair with each other. So Martha and Ludovic decide to get to know each other, at first as platonic friends, but then they start to gradually have feelings for each other and decide to embark on a romantic relationship. So, yes, let's talk about it. This is clearly the nominee of this group that has the lowest profile, at least in America. So I'm curious your thoughts on Miss Barrault and her mostly unflashy performance in Cousine.
Yeah, I had never seen this film before I knew of this film.
Mm-hmm.
I had seen the Joel Schumacher remake of this film with
Cousins, yes.
yeah, Ted Danson and Isabella Rossellini. I think part of the reason I've had trouble remembering her name is because I've had trouble remembering what happens in this movie I saw
Yeah.
5 days ago. Um, it's it's a fine film. I would say maybe I don't know 3 out of 5 for whatever that's worth. Um, it was understandable to me why it was a big hit because it's indicative of those kind of like European sex comedies that take a very adult, non-puritanical view of relationships, and they feel very kind of exotic and wild to American audiences, especially in the 1970s. I mean, this is the same period when Lakajuk Falls comes out and is a huge hit. I think her performance is good. It is very subtle, and it is surprising, when you compare it to the other nominees and how much they're given to work with, that she was nominated. But I think that there's this radiant quality about her that translates really well in the performance. Like she does seem to just kind of beam off the screen, right? And
Mm-hmm.
I found her to be the most interesting aspect of the film. But yeah, I mean, it is surprising. I was thinking about like what you could compare it to in the modern era in terms of a nomination that came out of nowhere, and something like Marina de Tavera perhaps for Roma, or yeah, I mean, it's just I think that she probably got in just sort of off of the overall strength of her movie,
Right.
since it was able to get into those other categories.
Yeah, this is a curious one. I was not the biggest fan of the film. I do get what it's going for. I feel like it's kind of lightly poking fun at like conventions, and I think the structure with like the weddings and the funerals, these sort of traditional gathering places, and then sort of all of that giving way to dysfunction. It's interesting from a story perspective. I wish that I could say that I was as charmed by the film as it clearly wants me to be.
Mhm.
It's light, it's fun, it's not overtly going for any sort of like French pretentiousness that maybe you might expect.
Yeah.
Like it's just kind of a solid character study in a way. But at the same time, I just don't think that there's a lot of meat on the bones, quite frankly, as a
Mhm.
film or in her performance. You see her in the beginning, she has this kind of cool, serene quality, and that's kind of enigmatic. You kind of want to lean in and learn a little more about like what's her deal. She says
Mhm.
she tries to cry but that she can't cry, so that's kind of a part of her character, is that she is kind of unemotional in a certain respect, so that does have a way of limiting perhaps her ability to show certain layers, I guess,
Mhm.
as a character. Yeah, she just seems kind of uncomplicated at the start, and is just kind of smiling vacantly when she's dancing with him, and it's just at first I'm like, I'm trying to figure out like what the deal is here. It's
Yeah.
hard to get a solid read on her, and that's kind of why I do struggle a little bit to connect to who she is deep down. Like I don't think the film really does a lot of exploration of that, other than it's just, hey, we're two people, we're living in the moment, which is fine. Like I don't know if it leads to any kind of meaning or if it has that much entertainment value.
Mhm.
Not that every movie has to be like some profound sort of treatise on life or anything. I'm not asking for that, but what I'm kind of left with here is just like it's a cute little affair between a man and a woman, both of them playing their roles competently, and that's about it.
Well, I think the problem is that there's not a lot of interiority given to the character
Right.
on a writing level. Because, I mean, I think that there are versions of this same film that are more successful. The only things that I can really know about this woman is that she's married to a jackass,
Yeah.
who cheats on her and then comes home bragging about how he's decided to not cheat on her anymore. And,
Wow.
and
Thank you so much.
so,
Yes.
yeah, that's really big of you. I feel
Yes.
so blessed, to know that. And then she, retaliates by having an affair with her cousin, or her cousin by marriage, I should say.
Right.
And, it doesn't really evolve past that. I mean, you don't really understand much about her. At least I didn't. And
No.
I mean, this is a pretty short film. It's only about 90 some odd minutes. And I felt by the end of it, it was kind of running on fumes a bit,
Hmm.
because there was no real development to their relationship. They're charming together, you know,
Sure.
but yeah, I mean, and I think like in both of their cases, I think a flaw with the film overall is that there's not a ton of character development for either of them. There's never really any kind of conflict within their relationship, and so it just kind of feels aimless.
I would agree. Yeah. I mean, I think probably the strength in her performance is just what she does with her face.
Hmm.
I feel like it's very similar to what I was talking about actually with Anouk Aimee in A Man and a Woman,
Yeah.
where she's not some like extraordinary person, although she's obviously quite striking. But I think it's just in her glances and her sort of gradually opening up to this new relationship in her life that you kind of project meaning onto it, even if the film isn't necessarily projecting that meaning on a more explicit level, I suppose. So I think I don't want to psychoanalyze voters or audience members, but I feel like to a certain extent, we're sort of projecting more meaning onto this performance and this character than is what is given in the text.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really fair point, and, one of the reasons why if I had an Oscar ballot, I would have not nominated this for original screenplay,
Right.
um, especially over Paul Schrader for Taxi Driver, but that's a whole other
Yeah.
discussion to be had about this year.
Truly. I know.
Um, I mean, she's certainly great to look at. I mean, she's an attractive lady, and she does have a great screen presence. She sort of has this like a French Jennifer Lawrence type quality
Hmm.
about her,
Yeah.
but like I'm struggling to remember things from this movie, to be quite honest. Like I remember the scenes of them by the pool talking.
Sure. Hmm.
And I remember their kind of extended scenes in bed where they're playing around with each other. I mean, those are the most interesting scenes in the movie because she's given more to do, but you really don't learn a lot about her, or at least I felt I didn't. And I don't think it was something that was lost in translation necessarily. I mean, I had the subtitles on, so I could read what she was saying, and
Sure.
um, I still never fully got a sense of who she was as an individual outside of her relationships with these two men.
Yeah. I think really there's only one scene that I pinpointed where we do get some more insight, which is when she tells him that, like, a year ago or something, that she wanted to die because she was bored with her dumb little life, basically.
Yeah.
And she admits that she cheated on her husband with a guy from the office once.
Mhm.
And when I was watching that, I was like, this feels like we're finally getting to know more of this person. And it should be a somewhat big, impactful kind of moment that sort of maybe even recontextualizes everything. But it's like very matter of fact. And we just sort of move on from there,
Yeah.
which on some level I do appreciate that it doesn't feel like, oh, this is the big focal point and it's like it's going for naturalism clearly, but
Mhm.
I kind of feel like it goes so far in that direction that I don't feel the impact of anything really.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't I don't have to like have insight into her past traumas, right? It
Sure.
doesn't have to be
Right.
like that.
Yeah.
It's just I don't know, like what does she like to do on the weekends? You know what I mean? Like,
Fair
um,
question.
who is she, like who is she in relationship to her child, right? What kind of mother is
Mm,
she? What does she do for work? How is she at her job? Right? Just like these kinds of basic things that fill in a person's identity. And if you're going to make it about like, she has no identity outside of a housewife, well, then how does that affect her personality? I
right.
think that, when you look at the way that women were written in the 1970s, there was this push to break free of those conventional roles of like, how does this woman relate to the man type of roles?
Hmm.
And, this in a lot of ways feels like sort of a throwback to those early roles because I don't really know who this woman is outside of her relationship to her husband.
Yeah. I feel like I find myself wanting to understand what people saw in this.
Mhm.
Like, I don't know if it's a matter of me just not fully. Maybe it's just I wasn't there. Maybe you had to be there. I don't know, but
Yeah.
it's just I really struggled to connect with what she was doing. I did like one scene from her though where she finally decides that we're not just going to do the platonic thing, we're actually going to do this relationship, and they have fun together and they have sex all the time and it's a blast. And but then she comes home to her husband and Ludovic is calling her, and her husband is kind of like quietly seething
Yeah.
at the table, and she very calmly just says, keep quiet, one word and I'm gone forever.
Yeah.
And it's like I feel like we're gradually seeing her gaining some confidence in her life again and having the sort of gumption to stick up for herself in front of her terrible, terrible husband. And actually, that's kind of similar to a scene that we'll talk about in the next nominee, Talia Shire,
Hmm.
where it's kind of like, oh, she finally feels like she has the confidence to kind of level with him, you know? So I like
Yeah.
that at least.
Yeah. I mean, I would have liked more of that,
Yeah.
I mean, just, yeah, more of anything that kind of filled me in as to who this woman was. And I don't know if it was maybe just because, this movie was positioning itself as light entertainment or whatever, which is perfectly fine. But I don't, I felt as though there was no real attempt by the filmmakers to give her any moments where she could have some kind of agency over her own life and assert herself as something other than just wife and mother and sex object. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah. So, You remembered far more about the movie than I did, and I think I watched it more
Well,
recently
I
than
had
you.
to I had to write a lot down and try to have it stick in place, but
Yeah, I should have
yeah.
taken notes.
Well, the one scene toward the end I also wanted to talk about where she's like marking up her body with markers for some
Mhm.
reason, and they're kind of undressing, and she's like, "You didn't know I was crazy, did you?"
Yeah.
Where I'm like, "Well, I didn't." So, I mean, like, I guess I was as surprised as he was, but they're kind of like coloring each other's skin, and we see them washing each other off, which is fine, I guess. She just, for me, like, she doesn't seem like a person that would do that anyway, so it kind of comes out of nowhere.
Yeah.
Uh,
I mean, I could see, like, the good version of this movie being about her, you know, figuring out that she would like to do something like that. That's what's I
exactly.
think the problem with this movie is that it's like, you don't see the scene, like, leading up to that moment where she discovers that this is something fun that she can do. You know what I
Right.
mean? Like,
Yeah.
it's all seen from the viewpoint of a man, and that's
Hmm.
why it's like you don't really understand anything about her aside from the way that she looks, how she is in bed, how she is as a mom, how she is as a wife,
Yep.
like, and
Yep.
that's my problem with the film as a whole, and that's not a knock against her performance. I think she does the best that she can with this material. I
Hmm.
just wish that there was something more there because she does have a really appealing screen presence.
I don't know if she does the best that she can, but she does a competent job with it.
Yeah, I mean,
Like, if
I
she did the
guess
best that she can, I think I would be more wowed by this performance than I am, quite
that's
frankly.
fair. I guess
Maybe that's just not what was asked of her. So,
yeah, I always
who's
try
to
to
blame,
be,
really?
I always try to be a little bit fair to actors, I guess, because they're being directed to do the things that
That's, yeah, exactly.
yeah, it's really on the person behind the camera to make judgments about what is going on in front of them. And
Yeah.
but I do think that it's a sore, we always talk about in these lineups where it's like there's maybe two or three or maybe even four great performances and then one stinker.
Hmm.
Um, this is that. This is that one.
Yeah. Again, like that scene for me, it feels like a little bit like that meme where like the woman is in the grocery store and she has like a bag of chips on her head and she's like, "Oh, she's so crazy. Love her." Like, is she really that crazy? Really?
Yeah,
Yeah, I don't know. So, yeah, I agree that directing and writing has a great deal to do with probably our taking in of this performance.
mhm,
So it's just hard for me to kind of separate that when she just really is given so little to do. And
yeah.
she has more screen time than, for example, Talia Shire in Rocky, but I
Who?
feel like there is a difference there
Yeah, who
performance
feels?
wise.
Yeah, I mean, well, I guess Shire's the next person we're talking about, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Would you want to jump right into
Well,
into
unless you
that?
had anything else to say on Miss Barrow, I think we can
I've
probably move on
I
respectfully.
I mean, I've been, spinning my wheels much like the end of this movie, trying to
Sure,
come up
okay.
with ways to sum up the way I feel about this performance.
Yes. Let's move on to our next nominee, Miss Talia Shire in Rocky.
Mhm,
So, this is another interesting one for many reasons that we'll get to, but Talia Shire, she's a member of the famous Coppola family. Her brother is Francis Ford Coppola. Her father is Carmine. Her whole family is basically in the industry, including also her son, Jason Schwartzman.
mhm.
Sometimes I forget that they're mother and son. Just saying. Although, side note, it is wild how much she actually looks like her son in this era.
Yeah, for real.
Like, yeah, it's kind of wild. But yes, she was part of this showbiz family. She went to the Yale Drama School and she did a few movies where she was credited as Talia Coppola. But it was The Godfather that really introduced the world to Talia Shire, where she played Connie Corleone. And she also reprised her role in The Godfather Part 2, for which she actually got an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actress. And speaking of no other precursors, same deal there for her for The Godfather Part 2. But yeah, her next film after that is Rocky. So she is on a real hot streak in terms of being in films that people really love and also that win Best Picture. So she was kind of like a good luck charm, I suppose, in this era. But this role wasn't always, it was actually almost not hers, I would say, because Carrie Snodgrass, who we talked about on the show with Diary of a Mad Housewife, was originally slated to play Adrian, but that fell through. Susan Sarandon auditioned for the part, and she was apparently too pretty for the role, quote unquote. And so Talia Shire ultimately gets the part, likely due to that previous success with The Godfather, but also I do think it's worth noting that she said actually that she grew up as a painfully shy girl. So, on some level, I think she really inhabited what was required of the role. So, let's talk about it. As many people know, it's about an underdog boxer, Rocky Balboa, played by Sylvester Stallone, who also wrote the film, and his journey to fighting the heavyweight champ, Apollo Creed, who selects him to fight because of his Italian stallion nickname. And it's a story about him being sort of counted out, but ultimately finding a way to prove people wrong due to his sincerity, really, and his love of the game. And Talia Shire plays Adrian, who works at a pet shop. She's shy, she's a little awkward, and Rocky takes a liking to her, and the two of them gradually fall in love, all while that other sports stuff is happening. So let's talk Miss Talia Shire here in a Best Picture winner. Like I said, we should also note that we have 2 years in a row where we have a Best Actress nominee in the Best Picture winner, which is sadly quite rare
Yeah.
at this time. And also even more egregious when you consider that Louise Fletcher is not exactly driving Cuckoo's Nest. Talia Shire, not exactly driving Rocky. But Zach would love to know your thoughts on Miss Talia here. And yeah, the fact that she does have a relatively small performance despite being in Best Actress.
Well, so Rocky's one of those movies that I've seen a couple of times, just because it's on all the time,
Yeah.
and the sequels as well. It's quite striking to watch it again with the knowledge of what the franchise would become and who Sylvester Stallone would become, and seeing how kind of like grungy and down and dirty, but ultimately like hopeful and sentimental to the point of being almost a throwback to the movies of the 30s and 40s that it is. The ending of the movie always really gets me. Um, I'm a sap. I cry at everything. The reason why this movie won Best Picture, I suspect, is because of the last 10 minutes, and particularly the last few moments when Rocky is beaten and his eye is closing up and there's blood all over him, and you're not even focused on the announcement of Apollo Creed as the winner because that doesn't matter. What matters is him calling out for Adrian and Adrian running to him and them embracing and saying, "I love you, Rocky. I love you, Adrian." It's beautiful, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think that's probably why she ended up in Best Actress, even though I agree that it's borderline supporting. And I know we'll talk more about that probably. I think there's some questions I saw people had about that.
Yeah.
But it makes sense to me why she ended up in that category with relatively little screen time because her character and her performance are so much a part of what makes the movie successful, both with the Oscar voters and also I think just in terms of its overall legacy, like you listed all those people who almost played the part, and I just can't imagine anybody else but Talia Shire playing her because she is such an iconic character. And yes, she is, she doesn't have like the arc of a protagonist. She is there supporting Rocky, but she does have this transformation that is very profound. It has to do with him being in her life, right?
Mm-hmm.
Granted, but it is a transformation nonetheless. And it is something that I think makes this film greater than it would have been otherwise. Stallone wrote a really good screenplay in 3.5 days. And what makes it good is that he populates it with this entire world of characters who are helping Rocky along in his journey. And it really doesn't even matter so much how the boxing match ends. That's secondary to what the main story is, which is Rocky proving himself as an individual. And Adrian proves herself as an individual within that as well. Like, I mean, I'm sure we'll talk a lot about just the ways that she breaks away from her brother Paulie and asserts her independence as a woman. That stuff really does enrich this film and make it greater than it would have been.
Yeah. So I generally like Talia Shire, especially in the Godfather movies. I think she brings a different energy, and I'm glad she got at least one nomination for her work as Connie. And I think it's somewhat similar to with Rocky in how she is once again in a male dominated film, Italian American male dominated specifically, which is an environment she obviously grew up in. Have I been blown away with her like I have with others in this lineup? Not necessarily. I think she's obviously very capable, but even in some of these bigger films in her filmography, she tends to not always be my main takeaway when I watch her films.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, and I say unfortunately because I know people love Rocky as a film and as a franchise, and his relationship with Adrian is a key element of that. I do think there are parts here where she does just get overshadowed. And for me is not justifiable as a lead actress nomination. I would be very happy with a supporting nomination. Maybe she wouldn't be my winner there either, but I just feel like when I look at Rocky, I think about Sly, I think about the music and the atmosphere and Burgess Meredith and Burt Young. I don't really think all that much about Talia Shire. It pains me to say that, but I think some of it may be just the writing where we just don't get a whole lot of focus on her, and Rocky just looming so large that even in the scenes that do feature her quite prominently, a lot of it is just focused on her reacting to him. I mean, I do think she does bring a sweetness and an earnest quality that does really suit the role nicely. And you see how even if they seem like such different people, that they have this kind of shared sense of decency and just like being counted out. But in reality, they just have this, there's so much going on inside. And I think that part of it, I think, is well captured. I just don't think that the film really serves her well enough for me to find a lot of what she does super impressive. It's not anywhere near a bad performance or even a performance that I don't think about, like what we just talked about.
Yeah.
And I'm not even outraged that she's here by any means. But I did find myself on this rewatch really trying to focus on what she was bringing to the performance and to the film. And she does a very good job with what she has. It's just not enough for me to be really affected by it all that much. Does that make me heartless? I don't know. I think it's like they're really sweet together, obviously, and it's certainly the emotional core of the movie. But it pains me to say that there's something a little bit missing here that prevents me from being totally in love with the performance.
I think that's totally fair. And, I was looking at her credits post Rocky, and it's
Mm-hmm.
just because you would think that she had been in more significant films because she was in the first two Godfathers and in all the Rockies, or at least the first five. And it's kind of staggering to see that. I mean, basically after this, into the 80s, it's only Rocky movies and Godfather 3. And,
Right.
she really doesn't have, aside from her cameo in I Heart Huckabees, where she's appearing opposite her son, Jason Schwartzman. um, I struggled to find any films that stood out. I don't think that's due to her abilities as an actress. I think
No.
that has a lot to do with just typecasting, and people see her as Connie Corleone or Adrian Balboa, and they couldn't
Right.
really see her as anything else. But I think to be to be fair to her, it speaks to how iconic this performance is. That she kind of got a bit typecast, right? Because it's like people
Yeah.
do see her as this person. And I think that your response to her performance is really going to depend on how much you buy into their love story. I think it's a totally fair thing to say that it's like she's not the first thing you think about when you think about the Rocky franchise, especially as it continued onward
Well,
and
yeah.
he starts fighting Mr. T and Ivan Drago um,
Yeah.
you know, but I think it's fair to also say that she probably is in the wrong category. Who I would replace her with, is a different story. I think that part of the reason why she's in here is because um, there weren't a ton of really strong Best Actress contenders to
Right.
choose from,
Hmm.
and it helped her being in the eventual Best Picture winner.
And she probably got votes in both categories, honestly.
I would suspect, yeah, I would
And she was going to
suspect,
get in either way. Yeah.
yeah,
But yes, I do agree that probably lack of options. I mean, I'm just going to say it. Barbara Streisand in A Star is Born was
yeah,
a main alternative that we will talk about later in terms of probably why she missed out on this. But
hmm
there wasn't a whole lot of options. So yeah, that's probably why she's here. But the stuff with Polly, I think, is what I really responded to on this rewatch more than I had in the past, I suppose, just
hmm
because I watching this here for this, I had to really try to focus on what she was bringing to it. I think it's surprisingly darker than I remembered it being watching
yeah,
it again. It gets kind of violent. The whole thing with where she's making a turkey and he decides to just throw it out the window since
yeah,
he just wants her out of the house. And a lot of this stuff, I think, just from a screenwriting perspective, is it's just a nice, easy way for us to make us sympathize with Adrian and her struggle. And I think she does play up the shy girl thing in a way that is expected of her. Again, she doesn't have a whole lot to do ultimately until maybe that first date, I would
hmm
say, where they really get to know each other. Not that she says a whole lot on the date either, but I think the physicality of her kind of just like awkwardly at the ice skating rink is kind of charming. So, and I do like the quote that she says where it's like, you weren't born with much of a body, so you better develop a brain.
yeah. That's the moment where she starts to really shine as a performer.
Right.
Um, it's funny, when we were doing our ranking tier episode of Best Picture winners at AwardsWatch,
Hmm.
Sophia talked about the pet shop scenes in the beginning of the movie, um,
Yeah.
which she had mentioned those before I rewatched this, watched it this time, and I was looking at those to see just how bizarre they are, right?
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
you think to yourself, it's like, who who is this person supposed to be? Um, but
Yeah. Weird vibes. Yeah.
yeah, and just like the way that Rocky's relating to her, it's just
Yeah.
like the strange. I was like, it's does he do this every day? Every day with her? But I think that when he comes to ask her out for the date and they're on the ice skating rink, you start to understand her a bit more and why
Yeah.
she would be so nervous around men because the only other man in her life is an abusive prick, and here's this guy who is expressing interest in her and she's not quite sure what his deal is. She's really kind of uptight and afraid to become even slightly intimate with him. But those scenes are really tender, especially like when they go back to his apartment. There's a real
Yeah.
sweetness to the way that he coaxes her out of her shell, you know? And I mean, it's the classic thing of like, he takes off her glasses and it's like, see, you were beautiful underneath all of, all along. But it kind of worked, it's like finally somebody's, because, people are talking about her saying like disparaging things about her possibly being mentally impaired. And
Yeah.
when you see her start to break down a little bit and let Rocky into her life, it's really touching, I find.
It is. Yeah. I do really like that sort of push and pull there. Like you said, in that apartment, kind of just like, and it's remarkable just how guarded she is and how much she really does feel like that introverted person who only speaks when she needs to, and it doesn't feel artificial, it's almost like she's so scared to make any sort of impression that
Mhm.
when she does speak it sort of feels like a last resort, if that makes sense. Like
Yes.
she's out of options and now she has to say something.
Yeah.
Like when she would normally just distance herself from everyone and just sort of be in her own mind, but when he leaves her with no other choice, she does speak up, and naturally she does ask him questions once in a while, like why he's interested in fighting and all that, but she's not much of a conversationalist, at least in the beginning. So it is hard for her to really stand out when Stallone is just monopolizing so much of it, but she does have a unique kind of sweetness and a charm that does make their relationship feel earned, for as much as you can look at the two of them and be like, well, that's kind of a strange pairing, but like when you actually look at them and you see they're making eyes with each other and assessing each other, it does work, I
Yeah, and
would say.
when you see them like after that first date, when she's started to become more comfortable around him, and she's, they're like cuddling and watching television, you know,
Yeah.
or like she buys him the dog. There's just like really sweet touches there,
Hmm.
um, that I think help with her, her arc as a character. That lead up to that moment where she finally like moves out of the house and gets out from under Paulie, really asserting herself as an individual person. Like I guess what I'm getting at is that arc feels earned, you
Yeah.
know? It's sort of like, I don't know, the opposite of what we were just talking about with the last performance, where it's like, even though she has significantly less screen time, and even though she's not the main focus of the story, she does feel like she has her own kind of individuality given to her that makes her feel like a more complete person.
I would say so. Yeah. Yeah, that obviously that is her big moment when she finally, with Polly coming home and interrupts them and it's like throwing a tantrum,
Mhm.
and her finally drumming up the courage and being like, "You made me feel like a loser. I'm not a loser."
Yeah.
It is an earned moment, like you said, even though maybe a lot of her growth happens off screen,
Hmm.
since it's again not really about her. You're just happy for her that she finally decided that she's had enough of his bullying, and just like Rocky, he is they're both kind of scrappy in that way. Maybe it's not the most complicated stuff in the world, but that's where you really see that inner fighter in her, and why she would be attracted to a similar kind of earnest person who is counted out like she is.
Yeah, I mean, like I said at the top, this movie is a throwback in a lot of ways to films from the 30s, these very kind of like simple stories of good guys and bad guys. I mean, to this movie's credit, I'd say that even, like the antagonists of it, like Paulie or even Apollo Creed, they're given some nuance, right? They're not just like straight villains. But, there's a simplicity to their relationships and their arcs that's, it is easily digestible. It's not the most complicated thing in the world, but it does make it very entertaining and fulfilling to watch. I also think like it's a credit to the film structure that it spends so much time developing their relationship before Rocky even starts training.
Yeah.
I think it's like a
Hmm.
good hour into the movie before he's even offered to fight Apollo Creed, which for any other film that would be like at the 15-minute mark or whatever. Um,
Right.
but I think it helps in the development of their storyline that so much is given to it in the first hour of the film.
Right. Exactly. But I feel like even towards the end, when he's starting to lose his nerve a little bit about his fight with Apollo Creed and her having to step in and sort of encourage him and
Mhm.
give him the strength that he needs and all that stuff. I love how she just kind of treats him with grace and just is listening to him very patiently, and she's just there for him. And I appreciate that we don't get like some cliche speech from her
Yeah.
that is just like the classic sort of supporting wife thing that you get in so many of these kinds of movies. We just get this energy from her that's very much like, I know you can do this. I am concerned for you, but I also have faith that you can do it.
Yeah.
And granted, it's not like a big Oscar clip sort of thing, but it's the right sensibility for the film, and that she's showing rather than sort of indicating with any kind of hammy expressions or anything. Um, yeah, she has a nice light approach that doesn't feel necessarily like it's playing too much for the camera, I suppose, which I appreciate.
Yeah, I would agree. I think that I mean, like I said, I think that her Her performance and her character help elevate this film to something greater than it could have been. And I think it is instrumental in why this film was such a huge success and why it ultimately won the Oscar, right? Because ultimately, what you walk away with is the two of them coming to love each other, right?
Right.
Um,
Hmm.
and seeing something within each other that the rest of society doesn't see. And that's why that scene that you were just talking about is so effective, right? Again, very simple. We've
Hmm.
seen it in 100 other movies, um,
Yeah.
but when it's done right, it works.
And to loop it back to what you're saying, the very last 10 minutes, and again, those last 5 minutes specifically, are kind of transcending everything that's come before. And it's such, you leave on such a euphoria
Yeah,
watching the two of them embracing. And obviously, it's this combination of music and the crowd and just the two of them and their chemistry and all these different things. But yeah, she does bring the right energy where she's not necessarily standing out by any means. It
mhm,
feels like she is within the fabric of the story that is to be told here.
yeah.
So I like that element of it. Again, I don't know if she really belongs in lead actress, but she I think she does more with it than some other actresses would have, perhaps.
Whichever category you put her in, I think she's at least deserving of a nomination. And I think it's a fair argument to say that, and especially on this rewatch, I was looking at it in terms of that question.
Yeah.
And I think that there probably is more of a case to put her in supporting. But either way, I'm glad she was at least nominated because she is so instrumental in this film's effectiveness.
Yeah. So, unfortunately, again, the only time we'll be able to talk about Talia Shire, unless she has a brilliant late in life term that blows us all away, we shall see.
I look
But,
forward to your eventual supporting actress run on this.
oh boy.
Yeah, I'm talking about the '70s again.
All right. Let's move on to our next nominee, Sissy Spacek in
Mm,
Carrie. Okay, so I'm thrilled that we are now in the Sissy Spacek era
mhm.
of this show. This is her first of 6 Oscar nominations, and all of them are in lead. So good for her. Uh,
Legend.
yeah, so Sissy Spacek, born and raised in Texas. She got her start as a singer, but that didn't quite work out. So she transitioned to acting, and she studied with Lee Strasberg to hone her craft as a method actor, which I think I would say that you can really see in this performance right away. But before Carrie, she got her start in a film called Prime Cut, and then she had her sort of indie breakthrough with Terrence Malick's Badlands. And she got a BAFTA nomination for Most Promising Newcomer for that. But Carrie was really her big mainstream breakthrough. And yeah, I mean, what a breakthrough it was. She really fought for the part. There was a chance that she was going to miss out on it, but she really fought for herself. She showed up to the screen test with Vaseline in her hair. She was wearing this homemade sailor suit, no makeup, and she delivered a fantastic sort of screen test, and the part was hers. So, yeah, let's talk about how she did. So, Carrie is based on the Stephen King book of the same name about a high school student, Carrie White, and she is a social outcast at her school. One day, when she's showering, she gets her period for the first time, and she has no idea what it is because she was never given the proper education from her, as I like to say, dangerously religious mother,
Mhm.
Margaret, played by the great Piper Laurie. So happy to see her again after we talked about her with The Hustler.
Mhm.
But because the other girls made fun of her and bullied her, they're punished with detention by their gym teacher, Miss Collins, who is the only real ally for Carrie in helping her survive this place. But one of the girls decides to skip out on detention and is subsequently punished further when she's told that she can't go to prom. And because of this, she decides to get revenge on Carrie through pulling a stunt at prom that would humiliate her. But little do they know that Carrie also has secret telekinetic powers. So we've got a unique one here. Very rarely do we get to talk about a horror performance, especially in Best Actress. So tell me your thoughts on the great Sissy Spacek and her pretty iconic performance here in Carrie.
I love this movie so much. I've seen it many, many times, and on this rewatch, there was just a moment when I was watching the sequence where it's leading up to when she's going to get the pig's blood spilled on her head,
Hmm.
and it's just like multiple minutes of dialogue-free filmmaking where De Palma's camera is moving all over the place and setting up where Carrie is in relationship to the bucket of blood, and
Yeah.
Amy Irving's character is seeing all this happening and trying to stop it, and the music is swelling up, and I was just like, this movie's a masterpiece. It's just De Palma at the height of his powers as a visual storyteller. And were there not a clear number one in this category, I think Sissy Spacek would have been the most deserving winner of the
Mm.
bunch. She has talked about when she got this role, which was only her third film as an
Wow.
actress. It's
Hmm.
crazy to think about. The character of Carrie White in the book is sort of a pathetic creature. And Spacek said that in playing her, her take on the character was Carrie could have been the prom queen, right? Carrie could
Yeah.
have been popular because she had it in her to be so. And it makes it all the more tragic when you're watching this brilliant sequence of her going up on that stage and being crowned the prom queen, and then realizing that it was all for a gag and the most disgustingly horrible gag you could think of. But like, it speaks to what a brilliant actress that she is, that she's able to convey that. And at the very beginning of the movie, she's also able to convey how small Carrie is, right? Like, I don't mean small as in like her literal stature. I mean just like how no one notices her, how she always sinks into the background, how she doesn't want anybody to engage with her because she's afraid of what's going to happen. And gradually, as the film goes on, you see the parts of her that could be the prom queen starting to come out more and more and more, leading up to that brilliant climax. It's such a great performance that helps elevate this material. It's both the performances by her and Piper Laurie and De Palma's direction that make this more than just an exploitation film. And, we always talk about, the absence of horror in the Academy Awards. It's fascinating that, like, this is, at least to my recollection, the second time this decade that a horror performance has been recognized in this category, the other being Ellen Burstyn in The
Hmm.
Exorcist. They're just undeniable performances, I suspect. So yeah, I mean, I can't speak more highly enough of Spacek in this film.
Yes, I think they transcend genre, perhaps, in both of these cases. Sissy Spacek, I think, is a phenomenal actress. She really has this great sort of earthy quality and a charm that I think maybe naturally just comes from her Texas country background, maybe, but she just also has this great inner strength that can come out and really knock you out. Like in this movie, like in the bedroom, Coal Miner's Daughter, even Badlands, But I feel like in this era, she really represents a kind of young woman that isn't always seen in film and could very easily disappear into the background. But because of her strength and her wit and her sincerity, you sort of can't take your eyes off her. And she does have these incredibly expressive eyes on top of everything else, which I think really helps, especially here. But yeah, this is one of those performances where if I'm in 1976, I'm like, who is this actress? I'm going to follow her for the rest of her career.
Mhm.
And And I know that she obviously had Badlands and everything, but this is such, for me, a Stars Born performance, especially rising to this level of prominence and being on the cover of magazines and then getting this Oscar nomination. I think she is so striking and so vulnerable and heartbreaking and just honest. It feels like she's tapping into the experience of so many girls and women, especially who don't fit in, who feel like outcasts. Like right from the start, when you see her fragility and how much she has going on inside of her mind, even as she's like playing dodgeball, or those scenes in the shower, obviously, and that kind of burgeoning sexuality of everything. She seems quite innocent and pure, and she really embodies that purity on the surface until we get the blood
Mhm.
trickling down and thinking something is truly wrong with her and having no idea that this is perfectly normal, that, she's getting her first period and she reacts like she's truly dying, and she's so open and exposed right from the start. And as uncomfortable as it might be, maybe, it's really the whole kind of thesis of the film is really kind of hoisting her into the real world for everyone to see, despite not having the proper upbringing to let her know the sort of facts of life. And she really registers that discomfort and the humiliation of being a teenage girl in such an immediate way, I think. And obviously it helps that the camera is like right up in her face for so much of the film, but she really carries herself,
Yeah.
pun intended, with so much tension, like in her shoulders, in her very tentative looks, that it feels almost invasive at times to see her going through all of this. And I think, to her credit, you would just immediately sympathize with her as she's dealing with everyone just giving her so much grief for just like existing, really, you know?
Well, that's the De Palma thing, right? Where he is like
Yeah.
he's
Yeah.
playing with fire and he's putting really uncomfortable things about violence and sexuality right in your face. And that scene in the shower is a textbook example of why lessons about biology and sexuality should not be left up to religious fundamentalists, because what she's experiencing is a totally natural thing. I'm sure that it would obviously, I've never gone through that. I can imagine it would be horrifying to go through it for the first time, especially if you had no understanding of what it was. And the way that De Palma shoots that scene as well, where he's got her whole body in the shot and she's completely nude and shrinking away from all of these other teenage girls who are, he shoots in these really tight, uncomfortable close ups, screaming at her. It's terrifying to watch, and you feel so much for her. And like the one thing that about Spacek that I think is really remarkable in this performance, and it's the same thing with Badlands and the opening stretches of Coal Miner's Daughter, she's very effective at playing a teenager. You know,
Yeah.
she was like 26, 27 when she made this movie, which is, pretty normal, right, for people in their 20s to play teenagers in
Hmm.
movies.
To this day, yes.
Yeah, she is so natural at it, playing the kind of like vulnerability of somebody who is coming into their own and not knowing exactly how to deal with that because of their upbringings, because of their lack of experience in certain areas. And so yeah, I mean, like scenes like that I think speak to the power for performance, that you feel so much empathy for her and what she's going through, and how it just becomes increasingly horrifying as it goes on, even up to the point where the gym teacher comes in, and the gym teacher, you can register that even she is just like, please, like, calm down, and you're getting your blood all over me. This is so uncomfortable. Like, I don't know how to react to this. I hate to say that it's a brave performance, because I feel like oftentimes when actresses are asked to do these kind of performances, or they're, especially when they're in the nude a lot, people say it's so brave of you, like,
Hmm.
but it is brave for her to go to these places and to follow De Palma into this uncomfortable territory. And
Yeah.
you're with her the whole way. And it never feels exploitative because of how much empathy she's imbued in the character.
Yeah. It doesn't feel exploitative, but she is so exposed on many layers.
Yeah,
And in that respect, it does feel brave.
yeah.
So yeah, that this is a case where that is earned, I would say, calling it brave. And even like that first scene that she has with her mother is
Mhm.
so difficult to watch as she's screaming and being dragged into this room to repent for the sin of, again, something perfectly normal. But her mother is so overbearing and overprotective to the point of, ironically, if she wants to protect her daughter, she is also, meanwhile, physically and emotionally abusing her. And you can really see that, like, this person has no one, truly no one. She
Yeah.
has no one who can reach out to, no one to really call a friend. She kind of has her guidance counselor, sort of not guidance counselor, gym teacher
Hmm.
slash guidance counselor in a way.
Right.
It's kind of like the blurred lines there. But what that does to a person, I think, is sort of make them shrink into themselves. And that's what Sissy Spacek really understands and communicates very beautifully.
Piper Laurie is so good in this movie. I actually just rewatched The Hustler recently. They were playing it at the
Mm.
Academy Museum.
Ooh,
It's so striking to see her in those films back to back, which were literally her two back to back movies,
it's wild.
15
I
years
know.
apart. But I think that it comes dangerously close to edging into camp, right? And I
Hmm.
think that the way that Spacek plays those scenes is so integral to their effectiveness, that she does seem
Yeah.
truly terrified by what her mother is doing to her. And she does feel so helpless. And especially at the end of the movie, not, to jump
Oh,
ahead,
yeah.
but to when
Hmm.
she disposes of her mother in that inglorious fashion, which was a creation of De Palma's, by the way. Like in the book, the mother dies of like a heart attack or something. And it was like, well, that's not very cinematic. And so um, it feels so much more raw and haunting that, Carrie had to kill her mother in this way. But what's really effective is the moment when it's, after she's dead and she's filled with this regret because you realize, yeah, this is her mother. Of course she loves her, right? Like that's what's so hard about this. You know, daughters need their mothers, right? They need them to be there, especially if you have no other parental influence. And you can see so much of what's wrong with Carrie in how her mother relates to her. The ways that she doesn't tell her about sexuality, the ways that she doesn't tell her about her own body, the way that she keeps her sheltered from everybody else. Like you really see the effect that this bad upbringing has had on her and how much she struggles to overcome that because I think, it's like they don't really have anybody else, these two people.
Yeah, unfortunately for both of them. I also really love she gets so few opportunities to actually stand up to her mother.
Mhm.
There's a scene a little bit towards the middle where she says, "It's nothing to do with Satan, Mama. It's me, me."
Yeah.
And just like her desperation and her trying to assert herself when she's just like, "I'm going, you're not going to stop me." And I love also when her mother brings up that like Carrie's father, who went away, and her mother says that, tempted by sin and all that. And Carrie just says, he went away with another woman.
Mhm.
Everybody knows that. And you feel that sense of frustration and her really wanting to take a chance on maybe finding some happiness. So she is willing to fight back a little against her mother. And what's also important is that she's realizing just from researching in the library that like, hey, maybe there's others like me that
Yeah.
also have these telekinetic powers, so it's like she doesn't feel alone.
Yeah, and I think that's also part of what makes the scene at the prom so devastating is because she's searching for this acceptance and she feels like she's starting to have it. And some of it is genuine,
Right.
right? Because
Yeah.
it starts off when Billy asks her to go to the prom. It's at the behest of his girlfriend, played by Amy Irving. But you see the ways that he starts to be genuinely charmed by her because she is a charming person, right? She doesn't
Yeah.
realize it, but it is there. And when you start to see her coming out of her shell, that's what Spacek was talking about, was like she has this in her. And there's a moment where you can see her actually fulfilling herself as a person, you know?
Yeah.
And then it goes the other way, right? Uh,
Yeah. I mean, to talk about the prom scene, obviously it's such a huge showcase for
mhm,
her and for as a film itself. And even with her going into the prom itself, like that slight trepidation there, also mixed with her trying to sort of push forward and have a good time. I'm going to give it my best effort. It's
mhm.
really delicate work. And she gives such a great sort of necessary through line emotionally. And even seeing her smiling, like this big smile when Mrs. Collins talks to her at the table, like you're genuinely happy for her, even if you know that her happiness is short lived. And even that beautiful long take of them dancing
Mhm.
and the camera's just circling and circling her and Tommy, which is like kind of surprisingly sensual,
Yeah.
but then also she's like so racked with nerves and anxiety about kind of like why he's treating her this way, and it's so tragic seeing her in that sort of feeling of euphoria there because it's so fleeting.
Yeah, and it again speaks to her ability to play someone who is a teenager. You know,
Totally.
it's like
Yeah.
when you are coming into your own in that way and you're first experimenting with relationships, right? And contact with another person, it can be
Yeah.
really fumbling and messy and awkward. You know, you're like, okay,
You're
is this
telling
what,
me.
yeah. You're like, is this what adults do? I think so.
Right.
And you
Right.
see her in that one shot start to gradually become more comfortable with him, right? Um,
Right.
yeah, again, it's just like it's an incredible physical performance from
It
her.
is. Yeah. But then obviously when she is crowned
Mhm,
prom queen and the dread really accelerates there,
mhm,
and that euphoria that I mentioned that just turns into absolute bone deep humiliation.
mhm.
I love that Brian De Palma chooses not to score that moment also
Yeah,
until just the right time. So you're just sitting there in the discomfort of having really watched someone do something truly fucked up to
this
another person and you don't know what to do.
the sound of that bucket clanging back and forth while the
Yeah.
last few drops of blood splatter out is so unnerving.
Mhm.
And you sit with her humiliation for such a long time to the point where it really becomes uncomfortable, which makes it all the more satisfying when she starts to kill all these people, right? Like, I mean, it's disturbing and everything, but I think that there is a certain aspect to it where you kind of want to see her take her revenge because of Spacek's performance and De Palma's direction. You've been so intensely seeing the world through her eyes and
Yeah.
living her experiences that you feel as if you have been wronged.
Yeah.
And
Totally.
it's sort of cathartic to watch her dispense with all of these people who have treated her so badly and humiliated her so thoroughly.
Yeah. And her just silently processing that and
Mhm,
feeling that creeping sort of horror as she's remembering her mother's words. They're all going to laugh at you
mhm.
is so well done. And that look of absolute vengeance
Yeah.
in her eyes. Again, Sissy Spacek has the perfect eyes for horror,
Hmm.
and just combined with her being absolutely drenched in the blood is such an incredible image. And she totally rocks that scene. Like every severe look to the
Yeah.
side as she's completely wrecking this place with her powers. So fierce, so raw, so earned. I feel like Elmo with the flames behind me,
Yep.
just being like, burn it all down.
Yep.
you know, all the way through her slowly walking out and walking home
Hmm.
and creeping back into her house and then taking the bath to wash away all the blood. You cannot take your eyes off of her, and you're so on her side. Like she is in no way the villain of this film,
Yeah.
despite the sort of destruction that she brings about, because the real horror is at home. Let's be honest,
Yeah.
you know?
Like that moment where she goes and she takes the bath, and,
Yeah.
the amount of time that De Palma spends watching her wash this away, it reminds you of, oh yeah, this isn't a monster. This is a person who has been hurt, right? And when she comes out of the bathroom and she's calling for her mother in this kind of childish way, it puts you back into the mindset of this person who has been treated poorly throughout her entire life and is really just like a vulnerable child, right?
Yeah.
And much like with The Exorcist, you could sort of look at this as a metaphor for the way that people react to burgeoning female sexuality, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but I don't think I'm, I know that there's been lots written about, the use of blood in this film and how it relates to that. But, I think that a case really can be made for that as a metaphor for this movie. And you see her in those moments starting to revert back to the same kind of shy, introverted individual that she was before she started to have her awakening.
Right. Yeah, that is really beautifully played. And I think she definitely holds her own in that final scene there. But I also think Piper Laurie just really, that's where she gets to shine.
Mhm.
And she absolutely murders that monologue
Yeah.
about basically wishing she had killed Carrie when she was a baby.
Yeah.
Like, that's the extent of it.
What every
And I
child wants to
think,
hear from their mother.
yes,
It's,
beautifully stated.
yeah.
Yeah, I think Piper does overshadow her at times in that final moment, because she just gets to totally chew every bit of scenery
Hmm.
there. But also, that mix of emotions that Carrie feels when she does her mother in is very well done, because it is still her mother,
Yeah.
right? No matter what she may have done to traumatize her, she's still going to have a little bit of emotional attachment there.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's incredible. Both actresses at the top of their game in that final scene.
Yeah. And I mean, you can see again why they both were nominated in spite of the genre bias, because you could transplant those performances into any drama, and I think they would be as effective. And in fact, Sissy Spacek was in a movie, a sort of dramatic interpretation of this kind of dynamic in this movie called Night Mother, where I think it was Anne Bancroft who played her mother.
Mm-hmm.
Not nearly as good, kind of
Yeah.
kind of stagey and a little hammy, but I think it speaks to like there is room in these genres like horror for really good performances that are rooted in something identifiable. Like you just look at any number of religiously fanatic parents who are sheltering their children to the point of turning them into introverts, and
Mm.
it's almost unrecognizable from Carrie and her mother.
Oh, yes. Something that continues to be a problem, I think, especially in America.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's an incredible performance. I give credit to the Academy for deciding that horror actually does have its merits. Imagine that. And nominated her. And it's such an incredible beginning to her nominations that, yeah, maybe there was a sensibility that, like, this is like a welcome to the club nomination. We'll catch you on the next one. Uh, and she proved herself tenfold, I think, over the course of many decades, really. So,
Yeah. I mean, one of the best actresses who we've had consistently
yeah.
would have been fine with her winning multiple Oscars. And I think that, like you see, I do think that part of the reason why she wins for Coal Miner's Daughter is because of this nomination. You
I
know,
think so too. Yep. All right. Anything else on Sissy before we move on to our last losing nominee,
I'll just say,
which is a big one?
I'll just say as my just a personal anecdote. In addition to being a great actress, she's one of the nicest people I've ever met in my time in
Oh,
Los Angeles. So
that's nice.
yeah, just a wonderful all around person.
Good. That's very good to hear.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's move on to Liv Ullmann in Face to Face. Okay. So, deep breaths, everyone.
Yeah.
So, This is a big year for Liv Ullmann, actually, not only because she gets this Oscar nomination, but she actually released her first autobiography, Changing, where she actually talks about some of the filming of Face to Face. But yes, last time we checked in on Liv was her first nomination for The Emigrants, and it's kind of sad that given the nature of how much of an acting legend that she is, that Face to Face is her second and ultimately now last Oscar nomination. But yeah, like we said on The Emigrants, she does get an honorary Oscar all these decades later. But let's face it, the Academy just didn't do right by Liv Ullmann in her prime, other than these two, a measly two nominations,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, she's done many Ingmar Bergman films by this point, including Scenes from a Marriage, which people in the industry really rallied to get the Academy to change the eligibility requirements so that she could be eligible, but they did not budge. She'd also done others like Persona and The Passion of Anna, Cries and Whispers, none of them getting her Oscar nominations until we finally get to Face, which is arguably maybe her biggest acting showcase to date. And I do mean biggest, like huge. This is basically a one woman show, even though there are other characters that surround her. Like, this is the Liv Ullmann show. So, yeah, let's get into it. Face to Face is a Swedish film about a psychiatrist, Dr. Jenny Isaacson, played by Liv, whose husband is off in America and their daughter is at camp. So she's alone and she decides to move in with her grandparents for a while. And we learn that her parents actually died when she was younger. And one day, one of her patients goes to her house after requesting to be escorted there by two men. And the two men then try to rape Jenny, but they are not successful in doing so. But the whole incident really rattles her, and she gets to know a man who seems to want to sleep with her, but she lets it be known that it's not going to happen. But they get to know each other, and she opens up about the incident, and from there she really starts to unravel and re-examine her trauma, while also having some truly bonkers dreams. So, Zach, this is a lot to talk about. This is almost for me like talking with Sophia about Jenna Rollins in A Woman Under the Influence, where it's like you barely even know where to start. But yeah, tell me your thoughts on the great Liv Ullmann and her very intense performance here in Face to Face.
Well, like I said at the start of this, I was listening to your episode with Sophia about 1974 for some context, and it was specifically about this film and this performance because I think part of the reason why she was nominated was because she was deemed ineligible for Scenes from a Marriage. I think that's also why Ingmar Bergman got a directing nomination out of nowhere because, in addition to actresses rallying around Liv Ullmann, you had people like Francis Ford Coppola and Martin Scorsese petitioning the Academy to make Bergman eligible in directing and writing. And I think they both, at least Ullman would have totally gotten in had they reversed that decision. But I think there's also an element to Bergman saying, all right, well, if I can't get her nominated from Scenes from a Marriage, I'm going to one up it and
God.
give her a showcase that is so undeniable that there's no way they can overlook her, rules or not. And yeah, so this was, I'm a huge Ingmar Bergman fan, and I'm a fan of all of the films he made with Liv Ullmann. This was one I've never seen before because it's surprisingly
Same.
hard to get to. It wasn't even released in that big box set that Criterion put out for his 100th birthday anniversary. I guess there's some weird rights issues with it or something. But I think that it's not one of Bergman's great films, especially when compared to this period where he was making Cries and Whispers, Scenes from a Marriage, Autumn Sonata. But it does contain one of Liv Ullmann's best performances, just in terms of like the sheer range of what she's asked to do. And, she was the great muse of his career. There's a lot of great actors who have been in multiple Ingmar Bergman films, like Max von Sydow or Erland Josephson or Ingrid Thulin. Liv Ullmann is the person who I most closely associate with Bergman's filmography. And I was really thinking about this watching this film. Bergman's visual style is such that the most prominent feature in almost every single one of his frames is the human face. And Liv Ullmann has one of the most fascinating faces to watch of any actresses who's ever lived. And there are scenes in this film where she is asked to just go the widest possible range of human emotions, often in unbroken takes. And she is mesmerizing to watch, much like Jenna Rollins in A Woman Under the Influence. It's one of those performances where you can really see the actress giving everything that she possibly can to the director who she trusts more than any other filmmaker she's ever worked with, right?
Yeah. Oh,
Um,
yeah.
it helps in both cases that they had romantic relationships with these directors, so these directors really knew them well and understood how to get them to the places where they needed to go. But hard to think of many people other than Liv Ullmann being able to do this and not look like a complete fool.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, because this is material I think that could go very wrong. And maybe to some people this does go wrong. I've seen some reviews that have not been kind to this film.
Uh-huh.
But yeah, it's definitely interesting also to look at her two nominations because The Emigrants is a really great showcase for her subtlety and her face and like, what she can truly do just with those micro expressions, you know. And there's still quite a bit going on there that she's like traveling to America and all that, but it's a much more muted performance on the whole. And you compare it to this, which is just full chaos, full force, open, raw, ugly, crying, screaming, and reliving her traumas and breaking the fourth wall. It's so much. This is the most performance in this category, you could say, which is saying something when you also have a horror movie and also like what Faye Dunaway in Network is doing. This
Yes.
still feels like the most. But yeah, Liv Ullmann, I think, has them all beat in terms of really sort of delivering a messy and complicated role, getting that on a silver platter, and
Mhm.
just making a meal of it.
Yeah, and it's almost hard to talk about this movie in any kind of linear fashion because it is so much
Yeah, I
about,
know.
set inside of her psyche and it's going in and out of fantasy and reality. And I think about these two scenes individually as showcases for her. The first of which is the scene where she's reliving her trauma to Erland Josephson, the man who she's beginning a relationship with. And the way that she initially talks about this rape is in a sort of cavalier, almost joking way, right? She's trying
Hmm.
to ward off the pain that she feels by making light of it. And you see her very quickly start to break down and be totally unable to deal with it. And it's almost like a sort of one act play within this larger film. And she's asked to go to all of these different places. She's almost like playing the seven stages of grief. And it's, as far as I remember, all this just one unbroken take where she's, you know, moving out of the bed and she's pushing Josephson away from her. And then she's allowing herself to be held and comforted. And, it's just, it's all over the place. Right. And again, I think that without that trust that she's built up with Ingmar Bergman, throughout all of these films that they made together and the personal relationship that they had, it's difficult to ask somebody, speaking as a director, it's difficult to ask somebody to go through something like that that's going to be put out to be seen in front of a bunch of people. So you really have to establish a great deal of trust with the person who you're asking to do this. And I think you can sense that in the way that she just lets herself go free, because it is just like truly intense emotions that she's having to deal with.
It really is. And what's funny is just watching the film, even from the start, not knowing where this might be going. She's playing a woman who seems to be pretty much a put together
Mhm.
individual. someone who prides herself in her work and all that and doesn't openly complain all that much. But also because it's Liv Ullmann, there's also this hidden sadness there to where that there's more going on underneath than she's letting on. And then when those triggers start to happen for her, that is when she just starts to completely unravel, like truly like a yarn, really.
Mhm.
And, looking at those dream sequences, like that first dream where she sees a woman with what looks to be like an entirely black eye,
Mhm.
um, is truly haunting. And she has such a great face for horror. Liv Ullmann also, especially psychological horror, and she really registers the fear there, where it's not overproduced in a sort of mugging for the camera way, but in a way that something's truly gotten under your skin and you don't know exactly how to react. I love how now looking back on the film in those earlier scenes, she takes her time because of what's to come later on. And it's like this gradual escalation in her unraveling. And by the end, it's like we're not even going one step up, one step up, one step up. It's like exponential and it's like multiplying somehow. And it's so much to take in. And I do think that there are moments where it becomes a little overcranked
Mhm.
as a film, where it's just throwing so much shit at the wall, really.
Yeah.
And maybe the intention isn't always clear and some things get muddled, but she is extraordinary through all of it, regardless of how we may feel about the film.
Bergman sure loved his dream sequences and his Freudian imagery,
Hmm.
to say the
Yes.
least. Um,
Yeah,
yeah,
much to unpack there.
yeah. But I think like that, the other scene that stood out to me was the one that's towards the end, where again, it's
Mm,
like, I don't know, it's like a 10 to 15-minute long scene where she's just like talking about her entire life and, again, just like going through a wide range of emotions. Those are the most effective moments in the movie where he's just letting the focus be on her, right? As opposed to this sort
hmm.
of like metaphorical, dreamlike imagery. Which I mean, that stuff is effective in a visually striking sense. I mean, it's a film directed by Ingmar Bergman and shot by Sven Nykvist, right? It's going to be interesting to look at. But I think it speaks to, again, the amount of trust that she had in him, but also the amount of trust that he had in her, that, you would do like the most uncinematic thing possible, which is to film a person talking for such a long period of time and let it go on uninterrupted and let her. I mean, I cannot, I can't imagine being an actor. And the other person who we'll talk about later on in the same way is Faye Dunaway. But just like getting a script that must have had like just like pages and pages of monologues that thick, and
Yeah,
having to like digest that and then spew it out in front of a movie camera for I don't know how many takes they would have done of this.
I know.
Yeah. And to like have it be effective as cinema. Yeah, again, there's very few actresses I can think of who would be as compelling to watch for that length of time than Liv
No,
Ullmann.
that's very true. Yeah. Really, those dream sequences and those like weird purgatory spaces that we slip into are really striking,
Mhm.
especially for what she brings to it. Where, like, that moment where she's suddenly wearing the red hat and the red outfit and everything. Speaking of Ingmar Bergman, the
Mhm.
color red. Um, but, talking about hating the smell of old people and how
Mhm.
disgusting it is to grow old, basically. And we have that great breaking the fourth wall moment where she's looking directly at the camera and talking to Thomas about like wanting to open a door but being afraid of what's on the other side.
Mhm.
And there's kind of a helplessness that it almost starts to feel like Bergman is just torturing her at a certain point, and she's having to grapple with whether or not to like confront her deepest memories and traumas, which she does. And it's a really tense sequence that sometimes can feel like it can tip over into parody almost, but I think is just earnest enough that I bought into it personally.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Bergman was always one of the most parodied filmmakers who ever lived,
Yeah.
right? I mean, going all the way
Hmm.
back to The Seventh Seal and the image of the knight playing a game of chess with literal death. Um, And I think like the sincerity of what he's putting up there can be very easy to mock, but it does, at its very best, Bergman does manage to penetrate something really deep into the human experience and the human psyche. And this is why Liv Ullmann is always like the first person I think about when I think about his movies. She's so committed to what he's doing, to being that vulnerable and naked and raw, that it makes it very difficult for you to laugh at, you know? Um,
Yeah.
Somebody who is like that sincere in what they're doing.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, what more can I say? Extraordinary actress. Um,
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to that scene of her telling him about all of her childhood strife,
mhm,
growing up with this family that didn't have the healthiest dynamic, and just gradually unraveling as she's telling him about all the sort of condescending stuff that she was facing in her childhood. And when she makes eye contact again with the camera and is quite literally like re experiencing her trauma in that moment,
mhm.
it feels like she is screaming at the audience to stop hurting her
Yeah,
and to leave her alone. But we just stay on her and she keeps staring and she's just like begging for some kind of peace
yeah.
ultimately. And at a certain point, I truly have to check out, like for my own personal well being, because it's just so uncomfortably in her face that I need to look away for a little bit just so I can sort of collect myself.
I don't blame you. This is a long movie too. Like this is one of his
Yeah.
longer films in terms like
Mm-hmm.
you compare it to something like Cries and Whispers or Persona, which are both like 90 minutes, 85 minutes or so. Two of the most painful films I've ever seen in my life, but are mercifully short.
Yeah.
This one, at least the version I saw, was over 2 hours and 15 minutes. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so, I mean, it really is just like a lot to take in. I have to imagine what it must have been like to watch this in a theater and to have, to be like trapped in there with her for that amount of time, you know? Um,
Yeah.
it is like I do prefer seeing things in theaters for that reason, because you are just like you're forced to just like commit to the viewing of something.
Yeah.
And I
That's
think,
true.
yeah, I think certain like films like this almost benefit from that.
Yeah. It's a lot.
I
It's
mean,
heavy stuff.
what more can you
Yeah.
say? Yeah, it's almost hard to talk about because there's like scenes in this movie that are so. I mean, there's an extended sequence in this film where she's assaulted, right?
Yeah.
And it's very difficult to watch, even in the way that Bergman shoots it, where it's happening off camera, right?
Mm-hmm.
He's shooting it through these two door frames, and you know exactly what's happening. And the way that she reacts to that is so interesting. But again, like it's difficult stuff to deal with. And I think that it again speaks to the amount of trust that these two people had in each other, that they were willing to go that far creatively. And I think it's why they were both nominated, you know.
Yeah. A nice director actress pairing, which we don't get very often, but certainly deserved in this case, even though, again, there are moments where I do think it is almost too much.
Yes. Yeah.
But I'd rather it be too much than too little. What can I say?
Yeah.
All right. Well, I think it's time to move on to our winner, shall we?
Yes, let's do it.
Okay. The one we've all been waiting for, Faye Dunaway in Network. Here we are, sadly, at the end of the Faye Dunaway era of this show. Thankfully, she comes out on top with this last nomination. But yeah, so excited to talk about this performance. But in between Chinatown and Network, she also has The Towering Inferno in 1974. She has The Four Musketeers. She has 3 Days of the Condor in 75. And she's in Voyage of the Damned, also another ensemble film in 76. And then Network happens, and it's safe to say that she's still in the prime of her career in this moment, despite her growing reputation of being volatile behind the scenes. But she's still in demand. She's still respected, at least as a hardworking actress. And when Network comes around, she said she really resonated with the character of Diana in the script. And she has a quote where she said that Diana was more driven in her career than I was in mine, but I knew what fueled that sort of ambition. And I believe that. But she really went after that role, even though there were many other potential actresses in the mix, like Candice Bergen, Natalie Wood, Ellen Burstyn, Diane Keaton, Jill Clayburgh, Marsha Mason, Jane Fonda, once again, Jane Fonda and Faye Dunaway being in the same discussion for a part. But yeah, it was Faye's all along and would come to be one of her defining roles. So let's talk Faye and Network. So the film is about a TV network, UBS, whose evening news anchor, Howard Beale, suffers a breakdown on the air, which eventually prompts Diana Christensen, Faye, the programming executive at UBS, to consider reworking the news show to be more emotion-driven and have Howard speak his mind. And in the process, she takes over for Max Schumacher, the news division president, who she's also having an affair with, despite him being married. And so Howard has a big speech that really incites the country and drives ratings through the roof, which leads to Diana programming more inciting shows like a docuseries about a terrorist group. And through all of this, she shows little to no remorse as she strives to give America what she thinks they want. So let's talk Miss Faye Dunaway. Thoughts on another great here, Faye Dunaway, and her Oscar-winning performance?
Well, I mean, Network as a film is one of my top 10 favorite movies ever made.
Same.
I saw this for the first time when I was a teenager on TCM during their 100 Days of Oscars. And back in those days, I used to just record on these 8-hour tapes every film that they would play on the given lineup. So,
oh wow,
yeah, I would rewatch this over and over again, along with whatever else was on the tape. So I know every line of this movie probably by heart. This is one of those perfect marriages of actress and character, and you can't think of anybody else playing her. It's both the defining role of Faye Dunaway's career and the perfect Oscar win for her, because it is her best performance. There's an anecdote that Sidney Lumet tells about the first time he met with Faye Dunaway for the part. And she comes into his office and he says, I know the first question you're going to ask me. Where's her vulnerability? There isn't any. And if I see he's trying to sneak any in, I'm going to cut it out. Now, there's one moment where I think there is a little bit of vulnerability.
Yeah.
But other than that, she is almost like a shark, right?
Mm-hmm.
People always think about, when the first thing they think about in this movie, they think about Howard Beale, which of course is iconic. And, obviously he deserved to win. But Diana Christensen truly is the driving force of this film. And it's so fascinating to watch it today with what is going on in cable news, right? There's this great book that David Itzikoff wrote about the making of this film and how it predicted the sort of carnival direction that cable news has taken. He wrote that book pre-2016, right?
Yeah, it's wild, I know.
You think about, there are lines in this movie that she says that remind me so much of people like Jeff Zucker and Chris Lecht and David Zaslav, right?
Yeah.
Patty Chayefsky truly was a soothsayer in that regard.
Right. He's the real Sybil, the soothsayer here.
Yes. And, just talking about this as a movie and what I think makes Dunaway's performance so effective. We've seen modern day attempts to recreate what Network does, and they don't do it as successfully because there's too much of leaning into the cartoonish aspects of it, or sort of reminding the audience of what they're watching and laying it out for them and these
wink stuff. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. And that translates
Adam McKay specifically.
Right. And
to name names.
I wasn't going to name anybody, but since you did,
okay.
I think everyone knew what I was talking about. But
Hmm.
this movie is effective and holds up because it doesn't lean into that. And that includes in the performances. And there are times where you could see another actress playing up the villainous aspects of Diana Christensen. But what makes her more effective is her just total lack of anything but like her total lack of humanity. You know what I mean? Like
Hmm.
there's just so many scenes to talk about in this film where it's and you know I'm sure we'll get into all of them, but where she is just like so singularly focused on television and her job at creating it that nothing else can filter into it. She's like a living, breathing Nielsen rating, right? And I think that Dunaway plays her perfectly. And I can't think
Yeah.
of anybody else who could have done it, right?
Yeah. All those names I listed, I don't think any of them could have done as good a job as her.
Mm-hmm.
I love this performance so much. I love how fully committed she is to presenting such an uncompromising version of a woman who truly has no low that she wouldn't sink to. like,
Yeah.
and she is kind of this sort of amalgamation of the older generation's worst fears about like the new generation,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we get a few monologues from Max Schumacher. Great to see William Holden again after several years of talking about him with other best actresses. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, where he's literally like lecturing her about having no moral standards and not having any authenticity. And he's not wrong, technically.
Yeah.
but there's so much going on with this character. And I think Faye just finds a way to really also understand the film that she's in. You know, she
Mm-hmm.
knows that there is a satirical tone to this. And so she takes the version of herself that people may know her as this very serious, intense actress, and just cranks it up to 11
Mm-hmm.
and is just like, I'm going to double down on it. you know, if we put this performance in another movie, I think it would be easy to just sort of dismiss it as way over the top and just too nervy and intense that you can't find the humanity in her. But that is exactly what is asked of her. And she just makes such a meal out of all that great Patty Chayefsky dialogue and the dark sense of humor. She's also funnier than I remember her being on my
Yeah.
many previous watches of this film, which I love. Um, Seeing her, I found that despite having a character that seems a little limited on the page, I mean, it's a great part, obviously, and Faye
Mm-hmm.
even said like this is one of the best written parts for a woman in years. But there's only so much she can do on a character level with trying to find the human, sort of,
Mm-hmm.
inside the beast that is Diana. But she just delivers this performance with so much force and such a hunger in her eyes and just like a tenacity that is just really intoxicating to watch.
I think that
And I love it. Yeah.
yeah, and I think that there is something to how her off-screen reputation
Yeah.
helps influence this performance. And, you know, like there's lots of difficult people out there who don't get nearly the amount of flack that she got, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Mostly men.
yes,
Hmm.
exactly. Yeah, I mean, it's a very different thing when you're a difficult woman, right? Who takes your
Yeah.
craft seriously.
Hmm.
I think that that informs the way that we view this character, right?
Hmm.
Because there is a steeliness to Diana Christensen, right? There is a ruthlessness to her. And it helps that the actress who's playing her has that in her off-screen life, right? That's not to
Yeah.
say that, you know, she's a mean person or anything like that, or that she should have been pegged as too difficult to work with. It just means that she understands what it's like to assert yourself in a male dominated world. And like you talked about how funny she is. I always think about the line where it's her introduction in the movie, and she's talking to her underlings, and she gives this long speech about how you know the network is in last place and they're trying to turn it around, and she ends it with saying, "I want a program developed following the exploits of an ecumenical terrorist organization. And she says it with the most straightforward sincerity, right? Like you would say any kind of, directive in any board meeting.
Hmm.
And
Here's my big pitch.
yes,
Yes.
and, she's not playing it up. She's just, I'm the boss. This is what I want you to do. And it's hilarious, right?
Yeah.
It also helps, make the ending of the movie more believable because you can't get to that point where she is seriously suggesting assassinating Howard Beale without seeing how far she's willing to go in order to get good ratings and how seriously she takes it.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I hadn't even thought about that aspect of it, but she really is starting at like a 10.
Yeah.
And then from there, she just somehow breaks the meter by the end of the movie. But yeah, that first opening diatribe that she goes on, I love. Also, another funny line for me is when she says, like, as an example of something that she would want
Mhm.
on the network, she says Joseph Stalin and his merry band of Bolsheviks.
Yeah, I mean, obviously credit to Patty Chayefsky for
Yeah,
coming up with a line like that, but being
but
able
she
to.
makes it sing, you know?
Yes, yeah. I mean, not kidding when I'm talking about like these huge chunks of monologues that she has to just like spit out in any given scene. Her relationship with Max Schumacher is so interesting to me as well because, in addition to being this fierce woman, Faye Dunaway is also, of course, very sexy and alluring, right? And we've seen her
Hmm.
play that in Bonnie and Clyde, and we've seen her play that in Chinatown and a lot of her other movies from this decade. And she has those aspects about her character in this performance as well. It's so interesting watching the ways in which she talks about her relationships with men and how she's, not able to have a successful one because she's so singularly focused in her job. And the other like hilarious scene in this film is when her and Max go off on a romantic getaway, and the whole time she's talking about her plans for the for for the programming on the network, and she ends up, they're having sex with each other, and she climaxes talking about the ratings for the Mao Zedong Hour. Like, she's not kidding when she says like her work is the only thing she can think of, and it's the only thing that gives her any kind of pleasure in life.
She gets off on it.
Yeah,
Yeah, literally. Yeah.
yeah. I also love when she's first meeting him and they're having dinner together. She's like, I'm very, she's describing herself as being like a man when it comes to sexuality, right? Like she says,
Hmm.
I'm aggressive, I finish early, and I just want to like move on with my day afterwards, right? Like
Yeah.
it's the kind of thing you never see a woman say in a film, right? Because it would
I
just
know.
be thought of just like too crazy and not what women are supposed to behave like. And I think that's just another aspect of the performance that is so great.
Yeah. And I love that scene where she does admit to being a mess in her personal life. And it's such a classic scene where you would expect something more vulnerable and personal, but she's so clinical, even when talking about what should be like her past traumas, like her former husband running off with his boyfriend,
Yeah.
or her analyst, having a relationship with him. And she just sort of lays it all out there with so much precision. And yeah, she sums it up and she's like, I seem to be inept at everything except my work.
Yeah.
And that's it. That's really all you need to know.
Yeah. And like, I talked about like the one scene where she sort of sneaks in some vulnerability. For me,
Hmm.
it's that moment where Max is leaving, right? Having left his
Yeah.
wife, having moved in with her, and they're having it out with each other. And she goes to get a teacup from the kitchen, and you see her hand shaking a little bit. She immediately stops it
Yes.
because, like, she doesn't want anybody to see that side of herself. And the speech that he gives to her, where he's talking about being close to death and being scared and needing her to be there for him in this moment. The reaction from her, she looks at him like he's an extraterrestrial who's speaking in a language that is not of this earth, right?
Oh
Like
yeah.
she just like does not know how to compute this. And that speaks to like, I mean, first of all, now that I'm in my 30s and have worked for my fair share of multimedia conglomerates, I identify with William Holden quite a bit. Like,
Yeah.
that's it. Yeah, it is scary, right? Just watching the
Hmm.
ways that your industry is developing and grasping for humanity from the younger generations. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, like you see that she just cannot comprehend what he is talking about. She has no understanding of anything outside of what she's seen on television and what
Yep.
she knows of television. Like everything that she says to him is about how he's behaving like a character in a program.
Yeah. And I feel like even in those twinges of vulnerability, I still feel like she never reaches out and tries to make us feel for her really in any way,
Yeah.
which I love and I think is a fascinating thing to see in 1976. Some people may see her as kind of problematically written. I personally find her riveting because we so rarely see this hyper competent woman who is also kind of a sociopath. And yes, she has an affair, but she couldn't care less about it. And yeah, I don't know if audiences were used to seeing a woman like this in 1976. And for as great as Faye was, I feel like part of maybe even the Oscar win too is just like we've never seen anything like this character
Yeah.
before.
Well, and I mean, like, the 1970s was such a great period for those kinds of complex roles, you know? And I
Mm-hmm.
think this is really the culmination of that, where just look at a few of these examples of women who came before. Louise Fletcher in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, Jenna Rollins in Woman Under the Influence, Ellen Burstyn in Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, Liza Minnelli in Cabaret, Jane Fonda in Clute. These women who are, in the case of Louise Fletcher, she's just deeply unlikable and, like lords this power over men in a way that is threatening to them. With Burstyn in Alice, it's asserting your independence as a single mom and saying, I'm going to have a career and a life outside of a man. With Minnelli and Jane Fonda, it's I am comfortable with my sexuality and I'm not going to apologize for that. And with Rollins, it is, I'm being suffocated by the roles of a traditional housewife. All of that stuff leads to a character like Diana Christensen being
Yeah.
written and being played the way that she is. And you're right. I mean, it is so totally unlike anything else that's come before it. And, in terms of like whether or not it's problematically written, I don't know. I mean, if a man had played this part, I don't know if we'd have that same kind of complaint. Um,
No.
yeah, I think that it is just fascinating to see this kind of role played by a woman and, to be written with the sort of, the antithesis of what you would have expected to put in there. Like there is no kind of, well, she's traumatized by a bad relationship that she had, or, her dad was a bad guy, or her, problems with her mom or whatever. It's just, no, she's just a singularly focused individual.
Yep.
And there's no explanation for it. No explanation is necessary.
Amen. Yeah, totally. And I feel like she just lands so many great punchline moments of dialogue. And they are as varied as something like when she takes over the network news show and she's just kind of casually tells Max, it's not your show anymore, Max, it's mine.
Mm-hmm.
And just like that casual devastation of that is so beautiful. And, obviously the moment where the mad as hell speech is going on and she's hearing all of the calls from around the country and she's like tossing the phone in the air and she's like, son of a bitch, we've struck the mother lode.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like you can practically see the money signs in her eyes there. um it's just, yeah, she just lands so much of that. I also love the moment where she meets with Laureen Hobbs, the
Oh yeah.
Communist Party leader, where who she wants to kind of offer this show to as like a consultant and everything. And she's like, "Hi, I'm Diana Christensen, a racist lackey of the imperial ruling classes." And I feel like there you can tell that she has calculated that ahead
Mm-hmm.
of time and is like, "I'm going to approach this in a way that Laureen Hobbs respects."
Yeah.
She knows what to say and how to say it, even though she doesn't maybe believe those words, or maybe she does on some level. I don't know, but she's just like such a bullshit artist that it's not like she's being authentic in that moment. I think that's such a smart scene too that doesn't really get talked about, but
Hmm.
on a script level, and Faye's kind of deadpan delivery of it is so good. So
Yeah.
good.
I mean, you could almost argue though that it's like her bullshit is her being honest, right? Like, because that's the only
Yeah,
way that she knows how to
that's true.
operate in the world,
Hmm.
right? Like her saying this kind of like upfront to Lorraine Hobbs. It's like, yeah, on the one hand, it's like she's sort of playing up this, the way that she is being seen by this person to sort of put her at ease. But on the other hand, it's like, you could say that she's just, hey, like this is who I am. Like, love it or leave
Yeah,
it, right? Like,
that's true.
there's no real kind of affectation to anything that she's doing, you know?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
she's never presenting you with anything other than just the actual text of what she wants, right? You brought up that scene where she said, like, it's my show now, Max. I always think about the line after he leaves and Robert Duvall says, "Was there something going on between you two?" And she says, "Not anymore." Like she can't, she's disappointed in
Mm.
the fact that he cannot see the world the way that she sees it. Like he's not as ruthless as she is and therefore is unable to go along with it. And she's like, "Well, I guess there's another relationship I'm not going to be able to have."
Yeah.
Like, yeah.
But yeah, to go back to the final few scenes for her, when Max is breaking up with her and is trying to get through to her, to go back to what you were saying there, you can see her sort of tearing up ever so slightly, but holding it in,
Mhm.
and it's like she just doesn't know how to access that part of her. And it's such an excellent scene because you can see that she's trying to find like an approximation of love based on what she thinks he wants,
Mhm.
but it all just comes down to that fundamental fact that she does not have that part of her. Or if she does, it's locked away somewhere. And it's like she's giving it an effort, but she just can't help herself but to pick up that phone when it starts ringing,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. And I mean, it's like these kinds of scenes play out in movies about career people all the time, right? Where it's like,
Yeah.
don't you answer that phone, because we're in the midst of something. The only difference is that usually in those movies, there's some kind of redemption for the character at the end of it. And
Yeah.
in this one, not only is there a lack of redemption, but she goes to the next step of committing murder on the airwaves, all in the
Hmm.
pursuit of saving her network, right? Saving her job.
Yeah.
Like truly nothing matters more to her than good ratings.
Yeah. It's such an excellent character.
Hmm.
And I look at this and I sort of reflect on what I've talked about with Best Actress on this series so far. And it feels like such an evolution. And like you said, the 70s really build up to this character so beautifully in a way that it's like Faye Dunaway was the right person to channel this very specific kind of ruthlessness that was not thought possible, really. I love it.
I
It's
do too.
iconic work from her.
Yeah. I mean,
And I wonder where she goes from here, but I feel like it's just she burns herself into the ground, and whatever she does, she goes down with the ship, or she shifts positions and goes to another company because she is a shark, like you said. So
yeah, she's gonna keep constantly moving or she'll die, right?
yeah,
Like
right,
you
right.
see that throughout the entire film, like with the way that Robert Duvall's character is jockeying for the the position that Ned Beatty holds, right? Like
Right.
ultimately she's trying to take out Frank Hackett and assume that part, but it's like there's no end to what she'll do to climb up the ladder.
Well, I think now this is a good transition point where we can talk about why Faye won this Oscar.
Yeah, let's do it.
Um, So, to give context with precursors, Faye did win the Golden Globe for drama. She was shortlisted for the New York Film Critics Award and the National Society of Film Critics Award. Sissy Spacek won the National Society of Film Critics, and she was a nominee with the New York Film Critics. Liv Ullmann was really the critics' darling. of the group naturally. You can imagine that just from looking at these performances. Winning the New York Film Critics, winning the Los Angeles Film Critics, and the National Board of Review. Talia Shire won the New York Film Critics Award, but in supporting actress, she won the National Board of Review, again, in supporting actress. But she does get a lead at the Golden Globes, gets a nomination there, so that's kind of a mess. And as we said, Marie-Christine Barrault, literally nothing outside of this Oscar nomination, although I guess you could say benefited from the film being well-liked overall. Campaign-wise, Talia really wanted the nomination, and she was super grateful for it. Faye was also very eager to be recognized. Liv Ullmann had her book also that she was promoting, and her and Faye were, from what I understand, sort of touted as co-frontrunners for the win, according to a few different articles I found. But let's talk about what happened here and why we think Faye was our big winner and why the others were not.
Well, as I was taking a listen back in your archives about Faye Dunaway's previous Oscar nominations, she'd only been nominated twice more before this, once for Chinatown and for Bonnie and Clyde. And it's interesting how she was in these two films that on their faces would seem like huge Best Picture frontrunners. And you'd think because of that, she would have been the runner-up. But I think that in both of those cases, she's probably third place at best for those films.
I agree. That's what I said on those shows. So yeah.
And I think that, obviously, like, the Academy loved Network and the fact that they gave it 4 major Oscars, including 3 for acting, which has only happened 3 times in history. It's that combination of right film at the right time and her being overdue. And I also just think that, I've talked about how much I love the performances by Sissy Spacek and Liv Ullmann and even Talia Shire, but I think that this is just undeniable, she's so clearly like doing something that is far and away like undeniable, right? Like, so I really don't think she had any competition, to be perfectly frank. But I guess we'll talk about that later on.
Right. Yeah, I think she's just part of that growing embrace in the 70s that sort of started with Glenda Jackson with A Touch of Class, where they're really rewarding actresses who just play women of conviction and women in the workforce and who just speak to this growing independence of women, as you stated. That, certainly is true of Alice Doesn't Live Here Anymore, which is more sympathetic than others in this trend. But yeah, it really was part of a trend that I think Faye did benefit from. And I do think it's also a fascinating parallel to look at Ellen Burstyn and her win there, and Faye Dunaway, where we also have actresses here in more palatable films, beating contenders like Jenna Rowlands and Liv Ullmann here, whose performances are so overwhelming and may just be too much for the Academy, ultimately.
Yeah, I think that's a fair assessment, because, Liv Ullmann especially, I can understand how there would be this groundswell of support for her just because of the fact that she won these Critics Awards, and because, again, like, she had this very noticeable snub 2 years ago. But, I think that there's just an extent to which, for as unlikable as Dunaway's character is, she's a bit more palatable, right?
Right.
It's a bit more easier to deal with what she's going through than what Ullmann is going through.
Yeah. And obviously the acting branch fell head over heels for Network.
Yeah.
So there's that too. I feel like actors were probably a big part of pushing her. Not that they didn't push Liv Ullmann, but it's really, I guess, really for the both of them, this sort of growing respect with each role that they took on. But that, yeah, Faye was just in a better, more well-received film, perhaps, that was easier to take than Face to Face.
It had 10 Oscar nominations. Like,
right.
It was far and away like the main competition to Rocky in Best Picture, I think. Should have won. But
Agreed.
uh, yeah, like I think that it's right place at the right time.
That's what I love. I love to see also where an actress really does win at a time where it feels like it is the right time for them to
Hmm.
win and for the right role too, because that doesn't always happen.
Yeah.
Sometimes we do get legacy wins or they kind of shoot their shot a little too early.
Hmm.
This feels like, yeah, third nomination. She's really proved herself and she's leading this incredible film with panache, really. So, really happy for her, and her photo shoot is iconic as well. We have to mention that poolside with her Oscar at the Beverly Hills Hotel.
Yeah.
Um,
Legend. Just.
yeah, and such a powerful artistic statement that it led to like multiple interpretations, right?
Hmm.
Like some felt that she was just like really just reflecting on this big milestone moment in her career, and then others thought it was sort of this awful expression that is meant that she was ungrateful somehow or disrespectful or
Yeah.
whatever.
Yeah. I don't get that.
Yeah.
But I guess it does, speak to like the way that her behavior was just picked apart and scrutinized all the time by people in
Yeah,
the press. And
it's true.
well,
Well, on that note, I think it's time to move on to our Twitter questions.
okay, yeah, where totally normal conversations happen every day.
Yes, very healthy. Not at all like the insanity of network.
Yeah.
Um, okay. Well, Matt Stillman said, "Is this Dunaway's best performance? Should she have won a second Oscar? And if so, what for?"
Yeah, it's her best performance. As far as second Oscars go, I mean, Eyes of Laura Mars, I suppose, maybe. It's not like a good movie, but it's crazy entertaining. Um, I suppose like of her nominations, a win for Bonnie and Clyde wouldn't have been bad.
Yeah,
I would have personally voted for Anne Bancroft in that category. Um,
me too.
but yeah, I mean, she didn't have that many opportunities, sadly, to to
Mm,
get more than one trophy.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
Yeah. I still think Bonnie and Clyde is incredible work from her, but
Well,
yeah, so is this. I think Network is her best. Should she have a second Oscar? Not really for me, but glad she has this one.
yeah.
So, Dark Shaka said the Academy mostly avoids awarding actresses for unlikable roles. How did Faye manage to overcome that obstacle? We kind of touched on a lot of that already, but
Different time. I mean, look at the films that were nominated for Best Picture this year. It was like
I
Taxi
know.
Driver and All the President's Men alongside Network and Rocky and Bound for Glory. It is interesting that like the very next year, the winner is Diane Keaton and Annie Hall, which is, another undeniable win, an undeniable performance, but, very different in tone and execution and all of
Certainly.
that.
And I mean, in terms of overcoming that,
Mhm.
she was in a movie that actors loved. Like I said, she was also the biggest movie star of this group
Yeah.
at the time. And she gets to chew into some great monologues. I mean, a lot of that can overcome an unlikable woman.
Yeah.
Yes. Jeremy Kaplan said, when Faye Dunaway won, she said she hadn't expected to win quite yet.
Mhm.
Given that she had been a leading film actress for about 10 years and that it was her third nomination, all for classic lauded films, what do you think she meant by quite yet?
Well, I mean, she was 35 when she won her Oscar.
Hmm.
And I'm sure she thought she had decades ahead of her with which to win this. And she should have, just off of the strength of this. It's, unfortunately, her career pretty much falls off the rails in films after Mommy Dearest. And
Right.
she was not given like hardly any opportunities to show the tremendous talent that she obviously had in
Hmm.
those three films which she was nominated for. So I mean, I guess
Yeah.
that's what she meant by it. Like she's look, I'm 33. I understand the sentiment of thinking that your best days are still ahead of you. Like,
Yeah. Yeah. I do. I think she probably assumed also that after those losses, maybe that she was just destined to be a bridesmaid
yeah,
and that maybe she would win later in life.
yeah.
But Rob Montoya said, "Who would you have cast in the role of Diana if Dunaway was not available?"
I mean, it's so difficult for me to answer this question because she's just one of those characters who is so etched in cinema history, right?
Yeah.
It's
It's like intrinsic, the actress and the character. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like you hear these stories all the time about how X person almost played this role or that role, and you're like, I can't imagine that whatsoever because, like who other than Humphrey Bogart could have played Rick from Casablanca? Certainly not George Raft, who was their original choice. I don't know. I mean, like it makes sense that Jane Fonda would have come close to getting that, but it would, like, again, it would have been a totally different vibe. Like,
Yep. I mean, going back to who else was in the mix, I would be very interested to see Natalie Wood
yeah.
in this role. I think it would really play into this whole theme of her being of a younger generation too, because
Hmm.
we had grown up with her. We, the general we, not me specifically, but
Right.
like I feel like that would have been a very interesting commentary, perhaps.
That was the one name that like jumped out to me. I was like, really? Huh.
Yeah.
Wow.
Right.
Because
Yeah.
I think of her in like Rebel Without a Cause or Miracle on 34th Street, right? I mean, that would have been an interesting kind of. I would have been interested to see what that was like, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Definitely.
and for someone who had 3 Oscar nominations, kind of underrated as an actress, you know.
Agreed. Jamie said, if you made Network in the 40s, the 90s, and the 2010s, who would be your Diana Christensen?
Okay,
Well, I don't know how it would have worked in the 40s, but
I
for the
thought,
thought exercise, we can do this.
yeah. All right, so I guess in the days of radio, perhaps.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Cutthroat radio producer.
Barbara Stanwyck from the
Oof,
40s. Yeah.
love that.
The 90s, I thought about Jennifer Jason Leigh,
Mm,
um, just because she was the most interesting actress of that period. The 2010s, God, I could say like, this role going to Brie Larson. She would be somebody who would be the first offer. But I could, maybe Natalie Portman, just because
mm,
she's, and I thought about those two women specifically because not only are they great actresses, but they have these reputations that precede them. It's like, oh, well, they're difficult or they're outspoken or, i.e., threatening to men. Um,
yeah,
but those were like the two from this like modern era that jumped out to me as being,
that makes sense.
yeah.
Yeah, I would go Joan Crawford for the 40s,
I mean, yeah, with the Dunaway connection.
right? I mean, it writes itself.
Yeah,
For the 90s, I would say Sharon Stone.
yeah, that's a good pick.
She has the power. Yep.
Mhm.
For the 2010s, I thought I'd just go rogue here and go with someone who was just Oscar nominated, Andrea Riseborough.
Oh my God.
Right?
Yeah, like I could see it.
Yeah. I don't know if she has like the movie star stature quite
Hmm.
yet. That might be what is maybe required of this role, but she would give a hell of a performance.
Yeah,
I'll tell you that much.
she absolutely would.
Yeah. Faye Dunaway's Salad Boy says, this was the end of the road for our beloved salad girl, Faye, at the Oscars. Do you think she deserved a nom or a win after this, or was this her peak? So I mentioned on the 74 episode, Mommy Dearest
Yeah.
should not have been a Razzie win. It should have been an Oscar nomination.
Yeah. No, I listen. Uh, I love that movie. I'm of the agreement with John Waters that it's not a bad film. There's just a couple of scenes that maybe edge a little bit into camp. Um,
A little
but
bit.
that's it's part of the appeal of the film, right? Like,
Right.
she's certainly deserved a nomination over Marsha Mason for Only When I Laugh, which, you talk about somebody spoiling a otherwise perfectly good and impeccable lineup. um,
There's always one.
yeah, the film that I think she probably came closest to getting another nomination for was Barfly. Have you seen Barfly?
No, but Andrew Carden also talked about this,
It's a
has talked about this.
it's really
Hmm.
hard to come by. Like the DVD is way out of print and it's never been reissued. But it's this Barbet Schroeder film. She plays an alcoholic in it. She's really good. Like it's interesting to think about how her career might have been revived if she'd been nominated for that. Like,
Yeah.
because it does become, I don't know, it becomes sparse after that, and you think like maybe Dunstan checks in. Is that an Oscar worthy
Hmm.
performance? I don't know. Like, I was only half kidding when I said that Eyes of Laura Mars was a
Yeah.
nomination worthy. Like, she's really good in that movie. Like, it's I don't want to describe, if you haven't seen it. You really don't want to spoil anything for you, but real Faye Dunaway fans will seek that one out.
Yeah, I mean, like, she wins an Emmy for Columbo in
I,
the 90s.
yeah.
So it's not like it's totally barren
Hmm.
for her. But yeah, definitely not up to what she deserved.
Yeah.
Greg Kreben said, if Mommy Dearest hadn't happened and harmed her career, what nominated performances in the 80s do you think could have been Faye's?
I mean, I could see her. I mean, again, it's always just like these roles are inseparable from
Yeah,
the people
I
who
know.
played them, but I mean, I could see her being a contender for. All right, this is post Mommy Dearest. I was going to say like Mary Tyler Moore and Ordinary People, but
I thought of that too. Yeah.
yeah, God, like I could see her perhaps in something.
Diane Keaton and Reds. Replace Diane Keaton. Have a Warren Beatty reunion.
I mean, again, like it's difficult for me to like see anybody
I
other
know.
but Diane Keaton playing that. I love Reds. I love her in,
Yes.
as we talked about on this podcast so many years ago.
That's right.
Um,
Throwback.
I could see her doing something like The Morning After, which Jane Fonda was in.
I thought of that too. Yep.
Um,
Replace Jane with Faye once again.
yeah, I could see her being a contender for Fatal Attraction.
Oh my God.
You
Well,
know?
let's not go too far. Hold up. Hold
Okay,
up.
well, how about Anna? Sally Kirkland's Anna.
I'll allow that. Yes. Yes.
um, Angelica Houston's role in The Grifters. I mean, that's like, this is all hypothetical, right? Because,
Right.
obviously we'll never know what would have happened had Hollywood not turned on her so dramatically and unfairly.
Exactly. Japes said, I've always felt that Michelle Pfeiffer and Faye Dunaway have the same screen vibe, i.e., gorgeous ice queen with great vulnerability. First, do you agree? Second, what role of Pfeiffer would you have liked Dunaway to have played, and vice versa? Great question. Great comparison.
You know,
And I sort of agree. Do you?
yeah, I mean, I actually just watched The Fabulous Baker Boys recently.
Ugh. What a star turn.
Yes,
Yes.
what a performance it should have won. I
Take that, Miss Tandy.
yeah. I'm sorry, Jessica. Nice old lady that you were. But yeah, that's like a role that pops out to me as like something that Faye Dunaway could have played. Maybe not at that stage of her career, because
Yeah.
but if that movie was made 10, 15 years earlier, or even like around the time that she made Bonnie and Clyde, I could see her playing
Certainly.
that. I could see Michelle Pfeiffer playing Diana Christensen.
Yeah.
At least being
Would have been
offered.
another great one for the 90s, right?
Yeah, if that movie had been made 20 years later, I think she absolutely would have been one of the people considered for it.
For sure. Yep. That's what I had for that. I think like What Lies Beneath, she could have done something with Faye
Yeah.
Dunaway. My one that I would like to tout personally is I think she would have had a great time as Velma Von Tussle in Hairspray.
Oh yeah, right. God, I could totally
As
see
just
that.
like, yeah, a racist mother.
Yeah,
I think she could play into that.
I mean, we know how she likes to talk to her salad boys, right? Like,
Let's be real. Yeah,
they don't call it method acting for nothing.
that's right. Yeah, but even something like later, like French Exit, would have been interesting for Faye to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's really
So.
it's so sad because like you look at her career post this Oscar win, and it's like I think the best film that she made was The Yards, the James Gray movie.
Yeah.
It's really sad. Like she deserved a lot better.
This is the last one, Faye related. Sammy Flowers said, Diana Christensen, Margot Channing, or Lydia Tarr. Which of these three women are going to leave a brunch with each other unscathed?
Oh God.
I love my listeners. What can I say?
Well, they all know how to put up a fight. those ladies. So
They sure do.
that's although among the three of them, the only one who got bruised and battered was Lydia Tarr. So, you know,
Literally.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, God, I don't know. Leaves unscathed is, yeah. What do you think?
I mean, I think Margot Channing is more likely to throw in the towel as she does at the end of All About Eve, personally. I think she's just like, I'm done with these two.
Yeah,
I don't want to deal with this.
smartest one in the
Um,
room.
yeah. I mean, both Diana and Lydia Tarr kind of seem to land on their feet time and time again.
Hmm.
But I do think, maybe this is just me, I think Diana just manages to beat out Lydia Tarr in the end because Diana is truly empty inside. Like, what does she have to lose?
Yeah,
Right?
I gotta say, like, I guess this will be my Tar sidebar as
Oh boy.
as one of the resident Tar lovers
Yes.
of this listenership.
The Tar me, if you will.
Yes, I feel like you like Diana Christensen is one of those foundational roles that leads to the creation of a character like Lydia Tarr, right?
Oh yeah.
Obviously there was a whole. You'll talk about this eventually. There was a whole reason behind Kate Blanchett not winning that Oscar ultimately, but I think it speaks to the power of that performance, both the way it's written and the way that it's played, that she came as close as she did to winning a third Oscar
Yeah,
for that. I mean, talk about like
I agree.
unlikable. um, um, although
True.
there's more humanity to Lydia Tarr that we see in the
Exactly.
end.
Right. That's why I think Diana goes unscathed by the
Yes.
end.
Yeah.
But yes. Moving on, Joey Gentili
All right.
said, why do you feel that after this Oscar nom, Marie-Christine Barrault, outside of Stardust Memories, had an absolute nada type of career in Hollywood?
I don't know that. I guess people just didn't know how to use her, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
I can't think of any other reason. It's with foreign language actresses, and I use that term
Yeah.
just in terms of like Hollywood filmmaking. It's very hard to cast them in non-English speaking roles. I guess what I'm saying is that, like, unless you do what Marion Cotillard did and you start to learn English,
Right.
it's very difficult for you to find work in the States.
I mean, I was also researching maybe why she didn't pursue anything in Hollywood. She straight up said she was not interested in a Hollywood career.
I can't
She apparently she turned down the chance to be in Apocalypse Now.
really. Okay.
She said that at one point. She
As
just wanted to stay in her home country.
as
Yeah,
Martin
I don't
Sheen's
know who she
character.
I don't know where she would have fit into that, but yeah.
Oh, I know what role
You know
she.
what?
It had to have been the scene in the French plantation. There's a scene where,
Oh,
yeah,
okay. Well,
that's that. Yeah, that had to have been
yeah,
the part.
but Hollywood is not the be all end all for everyone.
No, absolutely.
So,
Yeah, and like, there's a whole world of cinema outside of that, right?
is there though?
Well,
You wouldn't know it by looking at Twitter.
no, you sure would not.
Moving on. Fritz said, it can be assumed that Talia would have won Best Supporting Actress if she had campaigned for the Oscar there. What's better for her career, a leading nomination or a supporting win? I think a win always looks better on the resume,
Yeah,
regardless of which category. So I think probably better if she wins supporting, but maybe she wanted to be a leading lady star. Who knows?
I think that's what was going into her thinking, and
Yeah.
I do believe that she probably would have won supporting actress had she been there, because that category had no real clear front runner. The weirdness of Beatrice Straight winning comes from the fact that I think the votes are going all over the place.
Yeah.
Had Talia Shire been there, I think she would have prevailed and could have
Mm-hmm.
had a very different career. I don't, who knows? Because it is just rocky after this.
Greg Adams said, Bette Midler was heavily considered for Talia Shire's role in Rocky. Would you have liked to see her make her film debut as Adrian?
That would have been
My goodness.
can't. I'm sorry. I love Bette, but I can't imagine that.
Would have been interesting.
Yeah.
Would have been different. But no, I think the kind of Star is Born moment of the Rose, I think, is what makes that performance even more special.
Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
preview for the future.
Yeah.
Lila said, Talia Shire seems particularly annoyed when they announced the winner. Do you think she seriously thought she had a shot at a win, considering she was pretty definitely in the wrong category? And would you have nominated someone else in lead instead of her? Have you seen the clip?
Yeah, no, she definitely seems perturbed, to say the least.
Yeah.
I mean, look, Rocky was the front runner for Best Picture. I can't blame her for feeling like she had a shot at winning. It's kind of
Yeah.
odd that that movie only got 3 wins out of 10 nominations, but I have to think she thought she had a chance. She's not the person I would replace in this category if I had to take one person out, you know. Um,
Yeah.
in terms of who I'd replace her with, God, John V. Bujold in Obsession, like that's about,
Oh, well,
uh,
there you go.
yeah.
Probably not Barbara.
Sorry,
Um,
that's
yeah, I don't know. Maybe she just didn't like Faye.
I,
Who
I could
knows?
imagine. Right.
You know. And also, again, there wasn't a lot of media training with like how you're supposed to lose
Yeah,
gracefully at that time.
I remember. I mean, this is like almost a decade after what we're talking about. But if you look at the clip of when Sidney Pollack wins Best Director for Out of Africa, you can see John Huston, who everyone thought was going to win, turn to the person sitting next to him, say, "Who did I say?" And like,
Yeah.
who?
Yeah. Always love an honest reaction.
Uh-huh.
Japes says, Spacek is one of my all-time favorite actresses with 6 Oscar nominations. Why do you think she doesn't seem to have the same level of fandom and obsession as other actresses like Jessica Lange, Glenn Close, or Sally Field have?
I don't know. I mean, like I said, she's a very nice lady, which maybe plays into that. You know, it's like she's not known for having this like off-camera persona that is like catty or anything like that. She's just like a really
Yeah.
sweet-natured, down-to-earth person. So maybe
Mm-hmm.
that has something to do with it. And that translates to her performances as well, you know? Like she tends to just play really like nice, down-to-earth women, which is what was so revelatory about her performance in the Bedroom, where she was like just showing off sides of herself that she really had never been able to before.
Yeah, I think there's just a quality to Sissy that's maybe more unassuming than the other actresses there, who are probably more often in roles that they can really chew the scenery.
Yeah,
That's not Sissy. She's not like a diva type, you know?
not at all.
So, yeah. This is an incredible callback. This next question. Gordon, is valiant still the word for Carrie? Bravo, Gordon.
Yeah,
Thank you for that.
I
Shout out
suppose.
to Gladys George from the 1936 episode
My
for
God.
Valiant is the word for Carrie.
Yeah. I mean, your listenership is really devoted.
Yes. I'm going to say yes. Valiant is the word for Carrie White.
I mean, look at her. Like, could you think of anything
Right?
else to describe her?
Yeah. And dare I say, I would argue that valiant is the word for Carrie White, more so than valiant is the word for Carrie from Valiant is the word for Carrie.
I would agree with that. That's...
So my next question would be, what does this look like if this film is called Valiant is the word for Carrie? Does it have the same reputation?
Yep. Sissy
Yes.
Spacek for Valiant is the word for Carrie.
Where is the lie?
Yeah.
Yes. Let's see. Another one from Joey Gentili. There have been 3 adaptations of Carrie. Titular role played by Sissy, Angela Bettis, Chloe Grace Moretz. Margaret played by Piper Laurie, Patricia Clarkson, and Julianne Moore. Rank favorite to least on performances of the characters.
I mean, I don't like any of the other adaptations of Carrie, so it's an easy number 1 for me. I guess like Chloe Grace Moretz and Julianne Moore would be my default number 2 because I love Julianne Moore. She's one of my favorite living actresses. And I mean, I can't even remember the names of the other 2 people you just told me.
That's not good.
I'm sorry to these ladies. I, couldn't pick them out of a lineup.
Sorry to these women.
Yeah.
Wow.
If you
saw them walking down the street,
I would not know what to say to them.
Yep. Yeah, Angela Bettis and Patricia Clarkson. You would be able to pick out Patricia Clarkson. Let's be real.
Yes. Oh my God. I'm sorry, Patricia. Who I've met and was lovely as well.
Wow.
You
And
know,
this is the thanks she
I've
gets.
disrespected this poor woman. I'm so sorry. It's,
Yeah, I'll be upfront and say I've only seen this version. So
yeah,
all indication has suggested that I don't need to see any other version. So
I
that's what I'll say.
I would say that's smart. From what I remember of the, now that I remember, it's Patricia Clarkson in that one. They're more like, it's one of those Stephen King adaptations that's more faithful to the book and therefore not as interesting as a movie. So
Okay.
yeah.
So like The Shining
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
miniseries.
Yeah.
Okay. Andrew Carden said, "What are some other iconic mother-daughter movies that you could see Sissy Spacek and Piper Laurie ace?" Well, I know one that comes to mind immediately,
Well,
which
terms
is
of,
Terms of
yeah,
Endearment.
I was gonna say,
Yeah.
like
Right?
that's the one, right? Like that's the mother-daughter movie for of all time, right?
Yeah.
Like,
I would throw out a very fun alternate, though, that
okay,
I thought of, and I was like, a eureka moment.
yeah.
Wild at Heart.
Oh my God, yeah. Piper
Right?
Laurie in that part, yeah, I could see that. Yeah, I
She
could.
would somehow be even more insane than Diane Ladd,
And she'd
and
have
that's
the
saying something.
she has the David Lynch connection too. So
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
just saying.
that'd be fun.
Yeah. All right. Christoph said, "How many career nominations should Liv Ullmann have received?" Well, more than two. I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, pick any performance in a Ingmar Bergman movie.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna certainly I think she should have been nominated for Cries and Whispers and Scenes from a Marriage.
Mm-hmm.
The Cries and Whispers one is surprising because that movie had such a big Oscar success, and yet I think they
Yeah.
just had trouble picking out which one of those actresses they would single out.
She also had The New Land that year
That's
that
right.
may have
Yeah.
split votes.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Passion of Anna, which I've talked about before.
Yeah. Persona, Shame.
Persona, certainly.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I literally just like name any of Autumn Sonata, um,
Yeah,
which I
definitely.
suppose she would have been a supporting performance in. But yeah, it's a shame that it never actually happened for her to win a competitive Oscar and that she only got those two
Yep.
nominations. So,
Let's get to some miscellaneous questions here
all
to
right.
wrap this up. Chels said, "Rank them by hot girl / bad bitch vibes."
Well, I mean, I don't know that there's any uh, one performance that personifies that more than Faye Dunaway as Diana Christensen. So that's a
Yeah,
easy
number
number
one
one.
with a bullet. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, considering some of the subject matters of the other films, it's hard to say. Like Liv Ullmann in Face to Face has the has that. Like
I
uh,
would say number two would be Carrie,
I was gonna
because even
say,
though she's kind of down on herself for so long, that ending is
yeah,
iconic bad bitch material.
that's the one. And then Talia Shire towards the end of Rocky, where she's
Yeah.
standing up to Paulie. I guess my number four would be Marie-Christine Barrault.
Yes.
Because very nice to look at. If the movie were a little bit better, she might move even higher up my ranking.
Mm-hmm.
So
And she does have an affair on her own terms, so
that's
like
true.
we
Yeah,
get it.
yeah,
Bad bitch. I do think though that Liv Ullmann would be last, unfortunately, because she may think that she's hot shit and she has a great job and everything, but there are just a lot of issues
yep,
to work out there, and she seems very fragile for a lot of the film.
yep,
Sorry. It's it is what it is.
yeah.
Okay. James R. Byrne said, "Best Actress Scramble. Thoughts?" Sissy wins her first Oscar in 76, her second in 2001. Mary Tyler Moore nabs Sissy's Oscar for Ordinary People. Faye has 2 Oscars by 76. 67's Bonnie and Clyde, 74's Chinatown. 74's Displaced Ellen wins her second for Requiem in 2000. Her first was for 73, The Exorcist. I
Yeah.
mean, I like that combination.
I do too. Yeah. I mean, what movie Sissy Spacek really should have won an Oscar for? Is the
What's that?
one performance that she was not nominated for. Three Women. Like
Yes.
those two women in that movie, both of them should have been nominated. And Spacek should have been nominated going all the way back to Badlands as well. Like,
Yep. Cinema Sex Kitten said 1976 was the year that Charlie's Angels debuted on television. Cast 3 of these actresses as sexy super spies.
Well, I certainly Faye Dunaway would have
Yeah, she
been one of
feels like
those.
the de facto leader to me
Yeah,
somehow.
I feel like Marie-Christine Barrault would have been like the foreign pick, right?
Sure, sure.
Um, and
I would
then
prefer Liv Ullmann there, but go on.
oh yeah,
As like the silent assassin.
yeah, all right, yeah, Liv Ullmann would have been a better pick for that. And then like you think, okay, well, either Sissy Spacek or Talia Shire, they're going to be, you know, the ammunitions or computer science expert, right? Like,
Yes, or like the plucky one,
yeah,
you know.
you know,
Yeah.
for a second there, I thought the question was leading to cast the Charlie's Angels in these these roles.
That would have been interesting. Yeah.
Well,
Greg Kreben said, do you think Genevieve Bujold was close to getting a nomination for Obsession? She did play multiple roles in the movie, which sometimes pays off at the Oscars.
yeah, I mean, I just watched that movie recently, and she's great in it. I think it was overshadowed by Carrie, you know.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I would have nominated her. Probably, I don't think that the Academy was going to, because it just sort of seemed like an afterthought.
Yeah. I don't know if she was in contention. I mean, the film does get in for Bernard Herrmann's score at least, so I guess it was on the radar, but
Yeah. Well,
yeah.
I mean, as we know that that's a completely different branch that's doing the voting.
I know.
He had
Yeah.
just died, so there was that. He had that double nomination for Taxi Driver
Yeah.
as well. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, I mean, I looked it up because I was wondering if she got any kind of precursor traction, and there was nothing that I could find.
Yeah. Patrick Ross said, it seemed like a weak year for actresses. Any thoughts on Shirley Stoller getting in this year for Seven Beauties?
Well, it is interesting that that wasn't the fifth slot foreign language contender when you think about it, just because that film did get in for directing and writing and best actor. But yeah, I mean, it's been a long time since I've seen that movie, so I can't
I was going to
comment.
say the same thing. I don't really remember the performance,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
But I don't think it would have been a bad nomination from what I recall.
Jeremy Kaplan said the landmark TV movie Sybil was a sensation in 1976, with both Sally Field and Joanne Woodward nominated for the Best Actress Emmy and Field winning. If the film had been released theatrically, how do you think it would have affected the Oscar nomination lineup here?
I mean, I could see either one or both of them getting in.
Yep.
Because
Agreed.
that was such a huge deal. As far as who they replaced, probably
Marie-Christine.
Yeah, I think all 4 other ladies, unless Shire moves to supporting, stay in, and
yeah,
it probably ends up being like Sally Field getting nominated.
Maybe Joanne goes supporting. I don't know.
I was just thinking.
Yeah. Dustin Britt said, if Barbara could have chosen between Best Song and Best Actress, which do you think she'd have chosen for A Star is Born?
I don't know. I mean, she won Best Song, so
right.
But I think that it is really surprising that she didn't get nominated, even though I agree with you that movie's not very good, and I can't watch it now without thinking about Bradley Cooper and Licorice Pizza. Just
I know.
Yeah, aside from that, like, it is kind of odd that, because she won the Golden Globe, right? That was, yeah, and she had won an Oscar for acting before, so it's not like they weren't inclined to think of her as an actress. Yeah, I think maybe I feel like Barbara's happy with the way things ultimately turned out.
Yeah, if you look at her speech there for song, she's truly honored that she won for songwriting. So I think she's happy with her Best Actress Oscar and her songwriting Oscar.
Yeah.
Yeah. Final question from Joey Gentili. Recast these 70s Oscar talents in the roles above. Quinn Cummings, Cicely Tyson,
okay,
Susan Tyrrell, Sylvia Miles, Karen Black.
God.
I did find my combination here.
Okay.
I don't know if it's perfect.
You go first. I do have to think about this for a moment.
Okay. Quinn Cummings in Carrie.
Mm-hmm.
Feels like easy fit there.
Yeah.
Cicely Tyson I had a little bit of trouble with, but I went with a younger Cicely Tyson in Rocky.
Hmm.
I think could have worked. Possibly.
Yeah.
Susan Tyrell I put in Cousine.
Yeah.
Sure. Um, Sylvia Miles I have in Network.
Okay.
I think could work there. And then Karen Black I have in Face to Face.
All right. I'll switch this up a little bit.
Okay.
Okay. Quinn Cummings, yeah, definitely in Carrie. Susan Tyrell, I remember her from Fat City,
Yep.
and I am like seeing her in Rocky as a result of that. Like,
Yeah, that makes sense.
typecasting. Karen Black would be an interesting Diana Christensen, and I feel like she's about the only person who has the star power at that time to have been considered of those for those roles. Sylvia Miles in Cousine, and Cicely Tyson in Face to Face,
Wow.
because I think she would have been capable of playing all those different aspects of the character.
You know, I think I like your combination better than what I came up with. Yeah,
Well,
I think that's right.
I thank you. It's I was on the fly there a little bit.
That just makes a lot more sense, honestly.
Yeah.
So, well done.
Thank you.
Let's move on to our final segment where we will deliver our verdict on who we think was the runner-up of this Best Actress race. Zach, who was in number 2?
Well, I feel, so you talked about how Liv Ullmann was perceived as the challenger to Faye Dunaway.
Which doesn't always mean it was,
right?
To be clear. Yes.
I kind of think if I had to, gun to my head, pick who I thought was closest to beating her, I might actually pick Talia Shire, because she was in the Best Picture winner. I think it would be a distant number 2, but I think if you like Rocky enough to vote for Best Picture, you might be thinking about voting for it in Best Actress. But
down the ballot. Yeah.
Which is what Frank Capra said he was going to do. So she had at least one vote.
There you go. That's true. I think it is between Liv Ullmann and Talia Shire.
Mm-hmm.
I ultimately side with it being Liv Ullmann, though, for the runner-up, if only for the sheer stamina of the performance, and also her narrative from the snubbing of Seeds from a Marriage and the embracing of non-English language talent. Also, there's something very commanding about that performance that I think the people who really respond to it were probably very passionate about it, I would imagine. And so I do think that it was between Faye and Liv Ullmann, with Talia Shire just kind of coming up, maybe in the middle, but not really surpassing either of them.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, like I said, it's hard when you have somebody who is so far and away out front.
Yeah.
And, generally speaking, we look to precursors to make this determination. And, her Golden Globe counterpart wasn't nominated, so it's hard to say. But I do think it's a good case to be made for Liv Ullmann for all the reasons that you laid out.
Well, final question for you. Who would you have voted for?
Faye Dunaway,
Faye all the way.
Yeah, I mean, I love, like I said, love Sissy Spacek and Carrie, love Liv Ullmann in Face to Face. It's just, Faye would have gotten my vote.
I would also have voted for Faye Dunaway. So we are in agreement there. I think for as much as I was truly knocked over by what Liv Ullmann was tasked with and what she was capable of there, I have sat with Faye Dunaway's performance in Network for much longer. So there is a potential that eventually I will feel that Liv Ullmann was robbed of this Oscar, perhaps. But at the moment, I think it is the perfect synthesis of everything that makes Faye Faye.
Yeah.
And is such a, I mean, like you talked about the trend of this particular decade, but I think it is such a unique win at the same time.
Yeah.
So.
And it's just like one of the greatest characters ever written as well.
Agreed. Yeah. In one of the best films ever made.
Yeah. Hard to
Yeah.
argue with it.
I mean, speaking of going down the ballot, that would have been me in 1976 with Network.
Yeah, like hard to, and like in a good year too. Like,
Yeah.
with those nominations for,
With a vote or two here and there for All the President's Men.
yeah, and Taxi Driver, I would have had to find something to give it. Like probably the score.
Yeah.
Jodie
for
Foster
sure.
might even have been my supporting actress winner. I mean, and then of course, there's no urgency to give her an Oscar for The Accused, which
makes me very happy.
Yep, the timeline gets corrected.
I love that. And now we have flying cars.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much, Zach, for doing this. I truly appreciate it. This was somewhat short notice, I will just tell the listeners. So I truly do appreciate you for filling in and giving it your all, as you always do.
Thank you. I'm happy to come on anytime, and especially to talk about my favorite era of filmmaking and one of my favorite films.
Yes, this was a lot of fun once again. So tell the people where they can find more of you on the internet.
Well, you can find me, as long as it's still in existence, on Twitter and Instagram, Facebook, and Letterboxd at Zach Laws. And you can find my work at AwardsWatch, where I've been doing some writing and podcasting.
Yes, you have. And fitting right in with that great team.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yes. Thank you all so much for listening. You can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobson and Oscar Runner-Up. Instagram at And the Runner-Up is. Rate, review, and subscribe if you haven't already. And if you liked what you heard and want to hear more, go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup is. And next week, we will be discussing the 1977 Best Actress lineup, where the nominees were Anne Bancroft in The Turning Point, Jane Fonda in Julia, Diane Keaton in Annie Hall, Shirley MacLaine in The Turning Point, and Marsha Mason in The Goodbye Girl, with the winner being Diane Keaton. So with that, thanks again, Zach.
Thank you.
And I will bid you all adieu.